Hollywood didn't want it to be shown. P. Diddy scandal is deeper than you think. Epstein did not run everything on his own. If you wanted to have full control of the votes of a senator, you get them on film at an Epstein Island. The CIA's Book of Dirty Tricks had these very things. It's this secret Luciferian pact that they make that is how they get power. And it happens all the time. Years ago when Catch Me If You Can came out, my mom was like, Paul, it's a really good thing you're a good kid.
Right.
I said, why is that? She said, because you'd be the best con artist I've ever known. Right?
It's a good thing for a mother to say.
Exactly. I'm like, is that a compliment?
Yeah.
In fact, years later, another compliment. I was, well, I'll tell you that one later because this story is awesome. So I grew up in Utah. I was fairly, I'm going to say, restricted in my religious upbringing, and
Mormon.
Yeah. I grew up LDS, and no coffee, no tea, no alcohol, no anything, and that leads into some stuff later. Strip clubs, all the stuff that you have to do when you're in these places, right? This is all off limits, everything, and so I was a pretty good kid growing up. I wanted to be successful, and my dad at 14 years old, I said, Dad, how do I be rich, right? How do I make money? And he gave me 2 books. He gave me How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie,
right?
Which you can use those principles, however you want to, as you know, right? And
they're still all perfectly, they still all apply to this very day.
You can apply the How to Win Friends and Influence People, good and bad. Wherever you want to take it, it's all about creating that trust, creating those relationships, and then he gave me an audio program by Brian Tracy, The Psychology of Achievement, that helped me realize that my thoughts were things that I could create whatever I wanted around me. It was super powerful, and it changed my perception of the world and what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon. In fact, when I was a kid, I was beat up by some kids, and I went home and I told my mom, I says, I want to be a brain surgeon. She says, well, why a brain surgeon? She was so excited. And I says, because I want to fix how people think, right? And then later I changed it to being a heart surgeon. I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist. And because I think I realized that the only way to really change how people think is to change, from a heart space. And then I got in a major car accident, severed all the tendons in my hand. This was literally 2 months before taking the MCAT. And I couldn't, they didn't know if I'd have the dexterity to be a surgeon. They says, well, you can go into business. And, he actually said, you can be a regular doctor, Paul. I said, I want to be a regular anything, right? If I'm going to be a garbage man, I'm going to own the dump. Right. That's just how I think, right? So moving forward, bringing me into the undercover work, one of the things that really impacted me is my early 20s. I had a mentor. He said, Paul, he said, you should get involved in charity work. I think he knew that, I could go either direction on things. And I said, well, that's why I want to be rich, is so that I can be charitable. He goes, no, he said, start donating now. A big percentage of your money and a big percentage of your time. And I believe that's part of what brought me to where how does somebody become a partner, let alone a founder of a 20, 30, 40 billion dollar investment fund like I am? You're not a University of Utah dropout. The only way that I can understand it, because that's what I am, right? The only way that I can understand it is that I made that decision in my early 20s that I was going to contribute. You can call it karma. You can call it God, you can call it gifts of the universe, call it whatever you want to. There's a higher power very interested in us contributing positively to the world. And so I truly believe that the massive success that I got in my business career came from that decision. So but at the same time, I was like, okay, where do I focus my charity money? I was giving money to a guy on the side of the street who, and I had a friend that says, well, Paul, are you really making a difference? Are you contributing to the problem? I said, I don't know. I can't judge. I don't know if I was in a shitty home growing up, if I wouldn't be on the side of the street too, right? I can't judge him. But at the same time, over time, I realized that I was probably contributing to that problem as well. So I decided to focus my charitable focus on children.
Okay. Can I stop you for a
Absolutely.
second? So after high school, you go to university.
Uh-huh.
And you were saying and what did you focus in? And you're saying you dropped out at some point?
Well, I was at some point. I was studying to be a doctor.
Right.
I changed to
did you
finance.
graduate? Okay.
No, I never did.
Okay.
Never graduated. I pretty soon I was building a company that helped people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, etc. I built that up where I was earning more money than any of my professors times 10. So I was like, why the hell do I need a piece of paper on my wall to say I can work for myself, And so I built up this company. I ended up selling that company. My mentor told me, he said, Paul, I'm not going to donate any money to you or give you anything or help you. He says, but if you do what I teach you to do, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 30 and you'll have the time to enjoy it. And so I said, what do I do? And I kind of, I learned how to sell. I learned how to handle rejection. I learned how to build a company. And in doing so, I ended up selling that company that helped people with anxiety, depression, PTSD. I sold that company for $20 million at 29 years old. And that was mostly pink sheet, stock, and we were restricted, but I was rich on paper.
Right.
And that was important to me. But I had some liquidity, started investing in real estate, realized if I didn't hire a guy smarter than me, I was going to lose all my money in real estate. So I hired a powerful team, ended up building what became a multi-billion dollar real estate investment fund. Now, at the same time, I always felt like I was going to be in a war. So I had trained a lot on gun training, hand-to-hand combat, situational awareness, Krav Maga, edged weapons training, improvised weapons, all of those things. I have trainers on all of them. And plus I had the money to hire the best of the best. So I got really good at these things. And that's what ended up leading me into being recruited to play parts in child rescue missions. So
how does that play out? Like you get a letter, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm assuming it's more clandestine.
It was funny. I had been helping some political leaders get elected, and one of them was the Attorney General in Utah, and I had helped to pay for his election, introduced him to a bunch of rich people, et cetera. And I called him up and I said, "What's up, AG?" I said, I have front row tickets to the Miss America pageant. You want to come? And his exact words were, "Hutch, unlike you, I have a reputation to uphold."
Right.
He said, "I can't be front row of Miss America." And I said, no, it's not like that. Me and one of my friends was one of the founders of Yahoo. And he and I had paid for some children that had lost their fathers in military battle that year. And we were paying for these little girls to come and get crowned by a Miss America on stage at the pageant. It was a cool little charity thing.
Right.
He says, "Yeah, Hutch, okay, that's super cool. Yeah, I'll come with you." So we go out there, and because it was a fallen soldier charity, the Pentagon had sent a representative, a guy by the name of John. John was a CIA recruiter for 25 years, and before he went into his current position. And we were sitting there after the whole pageant was over. We're sitting there at this table. Now, understand, the Paul 10 years ago, I had supermodels by me. I had former Miss Americas there at the table. I have the Attorney General there, and then this John guy who was this recruiter. And he said, "Mr. Hutchinson," he said, "I've been watching you for the last 4 days, and I think your country could use your talents." And I'm like, well, what talents are those? He said, "I saw you in seconds break down the barrier of communication, become best friends with a billionaire, a bum on the street, a runway model." He said, it's about a 1 in 12 million is what we found the CIA of people who were that level of what we call chameleons. He said, your ability to just create those quick relationships is uncanny. He said, imagine this. We fly you to Dubai. We line you up with some dirty money guys. You have the perfect backstory. You run a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. He said, you become their best friends, get us the information we need. He said, I'll line you up with some real billionaires, make it worth your time. Well, his guys called me a couple months later, and I ended up turning them down. I didn't want to put my life in danger for some white-collar crime guys in Dubai. It just wasn't exciting to me. My company was going well, and so I turned him down. A year later, there was some Homeland Security agents, some others that were working in Colombia on some child trafficking initiatives. And they had found about 20 children that they wanted to rescue, but the U.S. government wouldn't give them the money. They needed like $50,000 to rescue these kids, but they couldn't prove that there was any Americans involved. And the government was like, listen, that's Colombia's problem, not ours. They're like, no, this is something we want to help with. And so they were looking for something to help fund that. And And I was contacted and I helped to fund that. Well, that attorney general who had been sitting next to me at that meeting with the CIA recruiter, he was in a meeting with one of the Homeland Security agents, with Josh Romney. Josh was like, his dad ran for president years ago and whatever. And this guy was saying, listen, I need somebody who can fund these missions on a big scale, like $500,000, $250,000, $100,000 that can put some big money in. But he said, the biggest thing that I need, he said, I can't teach my Navy SEALs how to wear a $50,000 watch and a $4,000 suit and negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. These traffickers, these cartel guys, they see through fake money all day long. Mm-hmm. He said, I need somebody who can handle themselves in a dangerous situation, but can negotiate a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction with these guys. Because of some of the things that were going on. And the attorney general says, well, have you ever met Paul Hutchinson? And Josh said, oh, Paul would be perfect. And I told him later, I said, you know what? I don't think that's a compliment. You guys both think that I'd be a good undercover sicko.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking these people's admiration for you is going to get you in trouble. You'd be like, stop telling people I'm such an amazing person. You're going to,
Well, what's funny is years later when the AG was introducing me, he goes, Paul has led, 30 plus, now over 70 undercover child rescue missions in 15 countries over a period of 10 years. So as I was leading him, he was introducing me people. He says, these big donors. He said, Paul has a very specific set of skills. And I said, you're calling me a good liar, aren't you? Because when you're in those positions, you've got to look them in the eye and convince them that you're there for some pretty awful things in order for them to open up the doors and show you where they're keeping the kids, et cetera. So,
yeah, you have to be able to fake sincerity.
Yeah,
which makes a great salesman. I do have two questions real quick, and then let's go back to that meeting when they first approached you. But real quick, did you ever go as a Mormon? Did you ever go on a mission?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
So only because James. So I have a good friend, James, and he's Mormon, and he went on the mission. But he very much is the kind of guy that he could just walk up and talk to anybody and just be and super engaging and follows, and he's very he makes you feel at ease right away, and he's also Mormon, went on a mission. And I was thinking maybe that's from knocking on door, it's gutsy to just be able, that's
for sure.
Most people don't have that skill.
In the Mormon church too, I gave my first speech in front of the entire congregation at 8 years old.
Yeah,
right. So
that's tough.
You're sitting out there in front, but yeah, on the mission, it's handling rejection. It's being able to talk to people anywhere, anytime, and you overcome a lot of fears in that space and be able to. But I took it to a whole new level. Even as I was building the investment fund, I got really, really good at walking in a room, identifying the real money in the room, and becoming his best friend quickly. That's what raising billions of dollars isn't just about having the right investment strategy. It's about knowing how to build those relationships quickly. I remember one time I was in Laguna Beach. We were at this multi-billionaire conference thing that was down there at the Montage, and most of the guys in the room, they're wearing suits and ties, and these guys are probably attorneys who work for the rich guy, right? They're CPAs that work for the rich guy. I'm trying to figure out who the real money is in the room, who the check writers are. And I'm looking around, and I see this one guy. He's got this straight, long, stringy hair. He's kind of short. He's Asian. He's got thick Coke bottle glasses, right? And he's got on his arm one of the hottest girls I had seen in a long time. She was actually on the cover of Elle magazine that month. She was 6 different international modeling magazines over the last 3 months before that. Someday I'm going to write a book on how to raise billions of dollars, and I'm going to have a chapter that's called "Follow the Supermodel She Always Knows." Right? When you have that kind of disparity, when you've got this short guy with long straight hair and Coke bottle glasses and this hot girl, so I knew he had the money.
Maybe he had a great personality. No, that wasn't it. No.
These supermodels, they don't care about personality. They care about how big your house is. So I'm like, okay, he's got the real money, and so I'm watching him, and I'm thinking, okay, I can't just walk up to him and say, hey, your girl's insanely hot. You're obviously the richest guy here. Right. I can't really say that, right? So I've got to, how do I get in the door with him? So I'm watching him. Pretty soon he stands up and he's walking out to the valet, and I'm like, shit, I'm going to miss my opportunity. And then I thought, oh, Now, this is early on when we were first building the fund, right? I was still broke. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to go out there, and when he hands his valet ticket, I'm going to hand one for mine as well. And in that uncomfortable silence when we're sitting there waiting for our car, it's a perfect opportunity to break out a conversation with him, right? And so I did. I go out there and hand him my ticket, and then I'm thinking, oh shit, I hope they don't bring my rental Hyundai before they bring his Lambo, right? I'll look like crap. But sure enough, we had a little bit of time there, a few minutes, and in that 2-3 minute period of time, I was able to say enough, catch his attention, where he gave me his card, his phone number. He says, I would love to meet you at my house later. And his house was literally right across the street from where Michael Jackson was when he died. He was that neighborhood. I mean, he had Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Others were like next door neighbors. So massive, massive home. In fact, he was like 7th generation billionaire. Like 7th, like his great-great-great-great-grandfather literally owned all of Taipei. The whole island was like a family island, right? His grandfather developed most of Taipei. So, Taiwan was a family island. And so building those relationships with people that quickly ended up helping me build, I was able to bring in massive money from billionaire families and build that empire with some of those skill sets.
When the attorney general said, have you, met Paul, and they brought you in at that time, they approach you at that point? Like, how's that? What are they saying to you? I mean, I get you're saying, they're saying, no, he's the guy to do it. But I mean, why? You hadn't done anything like this.
I hadn't done anything. The only background is the fact that they knew that I had extensive hand-to-hand combat training and situational awareness and all of these things. The attorney general knew I had that, but he also knew of the conversation with the CIA guy a year before, who had seen my ability to kind of read a room and say the right words. And so I was, at the time of this meeting, I happened to be in Atlanta, Georgia. I was at a 3rd generation billionaire conference. I was raising money for my fund, and I get a call from the Homeland Security agent. And he said, Paul, I want to thank you for some of your contributions to our Child Rescue Foundation. He said, we've been here in Colombia, and there's not, in Cartagena, where you thought we had about 20 kids, we've identified more than 50 there, and more than 100 that are tied to these rings in other cities. He said, we have a plan. He said, I believe we can rescue all 100 children on the same day at the same time. He said, but I need your help. And ego me was like, well, how much do you need? What kind of a check should I write for this? And I said, how much do you need? He said, I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days?
Oh, no, not me. No. Let me write you the check. I'm not going to Colombia.
Well, and I had never been to Colombia. I had heard
things. It doesn't
things.
sound like a vacation.
Well, not at all.
I mean, you've never been to Colombia. I'm sure it's beautiful in the tourist area.
Well, and at one time, back in the 80s, when Pablo Escobar was there, literally it was the most dangerous place on the planet. In fact, Pablo had a $200 price tag on anybody involved in law enforcement or anything. You could literally pay $200 to have somebody taken out in the 80s, right? So this is the only thing I had heard about Colombia. But, I was in an interesting position in my life. I was in an unhealthy marriage, and I was all about how do I fulfill myself with money and things. I had a house with 10 bathrooms, 8 private suites. I had 3 kitchens, 7 fireplaces, a full basketball court in my basement. But I also had a stage with stripper poles on my stage. There was this kind of energy. And I was thinking that half-dressed girls and NBA players at my parties all the time was fulfilling, but it wasn't.
Right.
And so I was thinking, okay, maybe I need to do something real with my life, And so I told him, he says, can you be in Colombia in 2 days? I said, well, why Colombia? He said, the head trafficker has a piece of property he wants to develop into a into a hotel that does horrible things, right? That's selling these models to wealthy Americans.
Right. Epstein suites.
Yeah, exactly. He said, and he needs a few $1 million to make it happen. He believes he can make tens of millions of dollars a year with this enterprise, but I need somebody who can negotiate the deal with him, who appears real, who can also handle himself in this situation. He said, so if you can be in Colombia in 2 days. Now, at the time, I'm in Atlanta. My home's in Utah. I didn't have time to fly home, change, get everything, and get down there in time. I said, well, what do I need to wear? How do I need to dress? He says, well, just dress as a wealthy playboy interested in a crazy party. A wealthy playboy. When I looked down, the suit that I had on cost more than my first car, right? It was conservative on the outside. It was bright pink on the inside. So I kind of had that style. And I had $50,000 watch, and I had $2,000 cufflinks on my shirt at the time. And I'm like, I think I got the outfit.
So I basically just need to get myself there.
That's right. So I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'll be there. He says, great. He says, we're going to have some security pick you up at the airport in Cancun. You just got, not in Cancun, in Cartagena. You just got to figure out how to get there, and you just be down there. And so I, booked the flight the next morning out of Atlanta. Had to go through Bogota, and in Bogota, the flight got delayed. The layover going into Cartagena. And we were literally out on the runway ready to take off, and we sat there for like an hour, and then the plane turned around and went back, and everybody on the plane was pissed. There's a bunch of Colombians pissed. We get off the plane, they tell us, sorry, you have to go the next morning. And these guys almost were creating a riot in the airport. They're like yelling at everybody. I'm like, this is not a good energy to be in. Plus, I don't want to be sleeping in the airport all night. And now, I was told I needed to arrive in Cartagena as that guy, right? So I'm literally in the suit. I've got the cufflinks. I've got the watch on. Yet I knew that at one point in Colombia, if you could pay $200 to have somebody knocked off. So if I was dressed like I was worth more than $200, I was a target. I was dressed like I was worth a shit ton of money, right? Literally the stuff on me was worth tens of thousands of dollars. But I was like, okay, I can't be in this place. I don't know if something's going to happen. The airport, definitely can't sleep here. So I'm going to go grab a Marriott, right? So I go outside, my first time in Colombia, by myself, not getting picked up by the Navy SEALs. And I texted them and said, hey, sorry guys, I'll be there tomorrow morning. They says, that's okay. Our meeting with the traffickers isn't until tomorrow afternoon anyway, so we're good. And I go out, and this guy's like, hey, taxi. I'm like, yeah, take me to the Marriott. Now, rule number one, don't be dressed like a target when you go to a third world country. Mm-hmm. Rule number two, don't go with some guy saying, hey, taxi. You go with a legitimate one, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'll get in. So I get in this car. And I said, just take me to the Marriott. And he starts driving. I'm on my phone, texting the guy saying, hey, sorry, I'm not there. And I see on the counter, I see the Marriott pass on the freeway. I says, Marriott, aquí. My Spanish was horrible at the time, and he still is. But he says, no, hotel. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe he has another exit, whatever. Passes another exit. I'm like, no, Marriott, aquí. He goes, no, hotel. He takes this exit, dark, shady part of town, like super dangerous. And he stops in front of this hotel that looks like you could rent it by the hour, right? There's drug dealers out front, big old thugs out there, a bunch of prostitutes sitting around. He goes, hotel. I said, no, Marriott. He goes, no, hotel. I said, no, Marriott. Now, I knew. Now, undercover work for 10 years. If I've got a still small voice telling me something, I listen. At this point, my inside voice was yelling, do not leave this car. You're going to die. You're going to die right here. I mean, there was no doubt whatsoever. My hair standing up on my neck. I'm like, this guy is working with those guys, trying to get me out of here. And I didn't know what to do. He was just sitting there, hotel. And finally, I had donated a bunch of money to the Unified Police Department and some others, and they had given me, as part of that, they have given me a badge. That was a honorary colonel police badge, and it was in my bag. Right. And because I keep it there just, in case ever something happens, whatever. So I took it out and I said, Policia, Marriott, ahora, please, Marriott now. And he's like, okay. So, he starts driving them. So I'm like, that was close. Maybe I was thinking, maybe I should have thought this through a little bit more. In fact, what's funny is 2 days before, when I had first said, yeah, I want to go, my business partner called me and he said, Paul, he said, I heard about, you're planning on going to Colombia undercover as a wealthy buyer of, he said, have you thought this through? I said, evidently not, right? He said, this is dangerous. He says, you're set. You could sell out today. You could buy an island, be happy the rest of your life. I said, John, would I really be happy if I bought an island? I already wasn't happy, and I was
about 2 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, you got about 2 months of doing nothing.
I know I wasn't happy. I had 2 helicopters. I wasn't happy already. I mean, what would that make me happy? I said, John, if I was doing something else dangerous, if I was climbing Everest tomorrow, you and I would have the same conversation. He goes, yeah, we probably would, Paul. I said, and when I'm 95 years old, and I look back at my life and I say, I built this multi-billion-dollar company, and I climbed this mountain, and I helped rescue this many children. Which of them matters at all? He goes, yeah, Paul, you're right. If you've got some skills that they need, I support you. So, but now that I'm in Colombia with all this crap going on, I'm thinking maybe John was right. Maybe I should have thought through this, right? So we go to the Marriott. Literally in front of the Marriott there in Bogota, there was guys with automatic weapons that were They were security guys, but were protecting that against whatever was outside. So I was thinking, okay, this is more dangerous than I thought. That next morning, of course, I go straight to the airport. We fly into Cartagena. These Navy SEALs pick me up in a fully armored car. So a whole different scenario than me being by myself the night before in Bogota. Armored car, former Green Beret Navy SEAL guys picking me up and took me to meet my first traffickers that day. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. I was there to help whatever I could. I actually thought, traffickers, what do they look like? What does a con man look like? What does a trafficker look like? I thought these guys would have tattoos down their necks, 3 earrings in their noses. They didn't. The first trafficker I met was a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
He was in a polo shirt, well groomed, driving a nice car, well spoken. The next time I met, she was a female. She was a Miss Cartagena. She was a modeling, she was a pageant queen and now ran a modeling agency. And I thought, these guys aren't traffickers. And a few minutes into the conversation, it got really dark.
Right.
And I thought, holy crap. In fact, what's interesting about that is over the next 10 years with the 70 missions, the common thread I found with the traffickers, even the perpetrators, the common thread wasn't tattoos and earrings. The common thread was arrogance and greed and lust. And sadly, there's so many of us deal in that same energy. Even myself at the time, I had a whole bunch of arrogance. I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson, right? I had a whole bunch of greed. I was leaving in mass excess. I had a whole bunch of lust, and I wasn't doing anything illegal. Maybe not really that bad, but I wasn't doing anything horrible when it came to kids and whatever. So I was absolutely behind taking those guys down. But I had to ask myself, how has that same energy of arrogance, greed, and lust that I saw within the traffickers, how has that affected my relationships, my family, my business, my life as a whole? So that's a whole thing that we'll talk about on the back end when it comes to healing and fixing the problem. But we're sitting there with these traffickers, and I'm thinking, okay, this is a dark conversation. I convinced them that I'd be willing to fund their project under one condition. We're going to have a party in a couple weeks. I'm going to bring a bunch of my rich friends down. They're interested in the inventory that these guys had. So our goal was we needed to get him to call all the other traffickers in the area and get them to bring all their children to the same place at the same time. Because if we could do that, then we could do a sting and boom, rescue them all at the same time. And the only way we can do that is convince him to, call the other ones, bring them all together. So I said, listen, if I'm happy with you and the amount of inventory that you have, I'll consider funding your project.
Is that how you're referring to them? The inventory? That's how they refer to them? Just inventory?
No, I can't say
okay,
real stuff online here.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of them do. They call them inventory. They refer to the new ones as 0 kilometer miles. Okay. And so we talk about them that way, and I can talk about them here because we won't get edited on our, on our algorithms and whatnot. But yeah, he was.
I'm sorry. When this guy pitches, hey, I want to build this hotel, is he specifically like how it's going to be designed specifically so that they can't leave?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that the models can't leave. So that and he had this business plan that the perpetrators would pay $100,000 per person as a membership fee per year, plus extra for extra services beyond what they had, that they could come to this resort that would be all inclusive and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a dark plan.
Right.
And
so it's a dungeon that's dressed up as a nice resort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's no way out and a nice resort that they can have them whenever they want to, et cetera. It was sick. You know what's sick about it, Matt? It penciled. Most crime does, sadly. You saw it.
Right.
You know, a lot of guys dealing drugs and stuff. It paid really, really well.
Right.
It was cash flowing, massive amounts of money, and on the backs of the most atrocious thing you can think of. And so halfway through the meeting, I'm sitting there, convincing him I'm willing to, consider his project, and he leans forward and he goes, "Pablo," he said, "I have a gift for you." I said, "Really? What's your gift?" He hands me his phone, and there's a picture of an 11-year-old girl on his phone. He said, "This is Princess, 0 kilometers." He starts talking about horrible things that we could do to this little girl. And I thought, if we could get these kids out before they were ever hurt the first time, that would be a miracle, And this would be a miracle, getting her out before she ever went down that dark road, right? I mean, she's already in captivity. And I said, "Fuego," I said, do you have more like her? You have more 0 kilometer? He goes, "Oh, yeah." He says, I got 3 or 4 more. I said, "You're bringing those to my party, right?" He goes, "Oh, no." He says, "Those are too expensive." I said, "What do you mean too expensive? I'm already paying this guy $25,000 for this party.
Right.
I'm paying him $500 per child, just for a minimum of 50 children, just for 2 hours in the afternoon." He goes, "Jefe," which is boss. He goes, "Jefe, you already paid $25,000. You want to F those other 0 kilometers? It's going to cost you maybe $2,000, maybe $5,000 for that little one. It's going to cost you maybe $10,000 more." Now, Matt, at this time, there was no acting involved. I was pissed. I was so mad. I'm like, he's talking about them like they're commodities. And I'm in my nice, took my jacket off. I'm in my nice shirt, monogrammed. I mean, the shirt itself cost more than what I used to earn in a week. I mean, this was, and I had my nice cufflinks on. I put my hands on my chest and I'm like, "You don't think I can afford an extra $10,000? He's like, "Oh, no, Jefe, no." I said, "I want every one of those new ones at the party." I said, "They better not," he said, "don't touch them." I said, "They're for me, not for you. You understand?" He goes, "Yeah, Jefe, I understand." I said, if anybody touches them at all between now and then, the entire deal's off. They're all for me. And so this energy back and forth. Well, I exchanged contact information with this trafficker, and halfway through the week, while we were waiting for them to set up everything, this guy he was texting me, and one of his texts was like, I think that he sent a picture with him with his little girl, his own child, in his back seat. He was doing these horrific things, and he actually had a family of his own, right? Now, he wasn't trafficking her, but a lot of these guys later on in life, they actually do their own kids as well. And so he sent me this picture. He says, "This is why I'm doing this, so that she can have a Ferrari someday, so she can have this lifestyle." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And then he texts me. He's like, "I believe that God sent you to me." And I'm thinking, "You're damn well right. God sent me to you, so I can make sure that little girl in your back seat never has to go through what these other kids do." So it was 2 weeks later. Agents met with the federal agents down there. They met with the U.S. Embassy and the Colombian federal agents.
Don't these people, and like the police in the general area, they have to be involved.
For
like
sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like
in fact, I'll tell you some stories
chaos
later about getting arrested by dirty cops on some other ops. It was very, very, very dangerous. Almost every operation, some of the local cops end up getting arrested as part of it, or they're involved in somehow. So they flew in these agents from the capital, and they didn't even know what the operation was until they were actually there. So nobody on the ground there knew what was going on. And they put these guys. They had 4 of them were there as our waiters, our maids, our cooks, so to speak. They're not very good cooks, but they're armed, right? They're 25 were there to storm the party at the right time, and these guys showed up there. If anybody's seen the movie Sound of Freedom, I'm the executive producer. I'm the primary investor. I was the first money into the Sound of Freedom, and the first executive producer in the movie. A lot of the movie was based on this first rescue mission we did in Colombia. We actually took 8 different rescue missions and put them together into one storyline, about 20 different operators, and put them all together as well. If somebody has seen the movie Sound of Freedom, the jungle, that was actually a different country. Yeah. It was an island, and we're looking for
conflate things because you can't make a 10-hour movie.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. We can't. Well, I mean, the reality is there was a lot of really amazing things that happened on these other operations that would fit really well into a storyline. We knew we couldn't take millions of people to see what we had seen, mm-hmm. but we could help millions of people feel what we had felt. And so taking all of these things, so everything in the movie really happened, but a lot of them were different operators, a lot of them were different missions, et cetera, that we put them all together. And it became the #1 independent film in the world.
Right.
It was phenomenal. And
you couldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was hoping, I'm an investor in real estate. The fastest way to make millions of dollars in the movie industry is to start with tens of millions of dollars, right? And then you lose all of that and you end up with $1 million. It's a losing game in a lot of cases. And so I didn't think it was going to turn out financially as well as it did.
Right.
But I was hoping that it would create awareness. See, back at the time of Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't guys like me. It wasn't the guys rescuing the slaves that created the biggest impact. It was people like you, Matt. It was influencers. It was people like Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which mm-hmm. was the media. It was the podcasters of the age, right? It created an awareness with good people of what was going on in the South. In fact, years later, when Abraham Lincoln met Harriet, he shook her hand. He says, "So you're the little lady that wrote the book that started the Civil War," right? Today, it's people like you that bring to light some of these things that we can then create and implement real change. So I'm super grateful.
You're killing me, bro. You're killing me. I'm just trying to make a. You just made that movie was hugely impactful, and every time you try and step outside of the box, like you got about a 99% chance of just losing your ass.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying, like, you could not have expected. You probably thought, okay, this is probably, I'd be likely to get some of my money back on this. And then it blows up because most of the time they don't. They just die a quiet death and nobody even knows it happened.
Well, and Sound of Freedom did die. We literally, it was completely finished 5 years before we were able to have distribution.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Hollywood didn't want it to be shown. Mm-hmm. Big media didn't want it to be shown. We got blocked everywhere. We had, it was insane. We had it finished and Fox International had the international distribution rights, and Disney ended up buying Fox, and then no distribution was able to be put together with Disney. So we had to buy out them, negotiate that. Then it got tied up for another, I think 6 months or more by another Disney exec that tied it up. I'm like, what the hell does Disney have against this stuff, right? And so finally we were able to break it free. But by then, everywhere. We went to Netflix, Amazon. Nobody wanted to do this. Am I the only person that thinks this is a good movie? Right? I mean, we put a lot into it. And what's funny is finally we're like, listen, to Amazon, just sell it, just take it for just what we're into it for, like 14 million. That's all. You can literally have it completely, do whatever you want with it. They wouldn't even buy it for that. After we ended up becoming the #1 independent film in the world, then all of a sudden Amazon comes back to us, hey, we would love to do a deal with you. So we charged them 30 million instead of 14, and they didn't get any exclusivity. That's just to put it on there. So these are the kind of deals that I don't know all the reasons behind it, but I do believe that the P. Diddy scandal is deeper than you think. There's so much of this crap that's going on in Hollywood that they didn't want us to have these conversations with the general public.
They're terrified for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the
rescue mission.
I was going to say the party, the party rescue mission. So you've got these guys, you've got 25 people ready to swarm the place. You've already got waiters, cooks. Like you've got the place staffed with. Are they all well? They're also Colombians, right?
Yeah,
There's Colombians and
well, the gringos, the white guys, they were my party guys. These were ones I said these are my rich friends from America.
They're not rich friends, right?
Yeah, they were Navy SEALs, Green Berets. They're pretty badasses that were hanging out in the pool, going, "Yeah, awesome, man! This is great." And we had undercover cameras that were set up so we could capture these guys talking about really why the kids were there. We didn't want them later to say, "Oh, I thought they were there for a pool party." No, you said on camera, this is why they were there. This is what they were willing to do. This is how much you're charging me, et cetera. So we have these undercover cameras that were capturing everything they were saying. So we're sitting at this table negotiating this deal. And once we had all the information on camera, we ordered tequila. That was our sign for our waiters to go back and radio, and all of a sudden 25 of the federal agents were supposed to show up. They didn't show up for 45 minutes. Now, we didn't know why. We didn't know why they weren't going to show up. All we knew is they were supposed to be there 2 minutes later. And so they bring out the tequila. We do the tequila. One of the traffickers says, "Okay, time for the party to start," right? Because to them, that was a sign it was time to start the party. And so he brings out the powder. A couple of them go inside to get some of the children. And we're thinking, okay, what do we do here? And you could hear some of the children crying inside. They were so scared of coming out. And a few minutes later, they come back out and they had 4 0-kilometer, brand new, just little kids. They had 11-year-old little boy that was taken from Haiti. They gave him some white powder to make it so that he wouldn't cry while he was being in that situation. There was 3 other girls. One of the little girls was the same one that he showed me on the picture that he said was 11.
Right.
And she had this little kitty cat face on her shirt. And she had these long red braids on the side. And Matt, I'm sitting down. I'm as tall as we are right now, sitting down. This little girl standing up wasn't much taller than I was sitting down. So imagine, you're sitting down, you're eye level with this child. And there was tear stains in her makeup face. She had been in there. She was so scared of coming out to meet me. Mm-hmm. And everything in me wanted to say, no, you're going to be fine. It's not me. I'm not who you think. You're going to see your parents again. I couldn't say that. The traffickers are still there. The agents still hadn't showed up. And we have no idea why nobody had come to do the sting yet. And we're like, how do we deal with this? And I said, you know what? I said, here's the thing. This is amazing. I'm so impressed with the inventory that you brought. But if I start snorting the cocaine, if we start, getting time with these kids, I'm going to enjoy myself, but I'm going to be pretty effed up for the next little while. You've just proven to me that you could do what you said you could do. Why don't we instead right now, why don't we get this deal done? Somebody bring me a pen, somebody bring me a notebook, take these kids back inside, and we're going to negotiate this. Now, back up 2 minutes before. I'm sitting there face to face with this child. I made a commitment at that moment to myself, to God, to that child, that I would dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. I couldn't imagine anything worse than what I was seeing in front of me at that time. And so I said, and I believe, at this time, I'm nothing special. I'm no Navy SEAL. I'm no Green Beret. This is literally my second now undercover mission. But I believe that it was truly divine intervention that I was there at that time. The only reason why that's so important is because I had just negotiated hundreds of business deals over the last 10 years before that. And so doing a business deal was secondhand. So I said, you know what, bring pen and paper. We're going to send the kids back inside. Let's plan this deal right now. And so they bring out a pen and paper, and I'm just delay. How do we delay until the agents actually get here? Because we can't have that happen.
Where are these guys? Where are they?
We found out later that there was a lady that was part of the Child Protective Services, like a pretty high level, like the top lady, who slept through her freaking alarm that morning. She missed the boat coming out to the island, and she was so high level, she says, don't do this thing until I'm there. Now, we didn't know that.
Right.
All we knew is that we knew there was federal agents in boats off the coast of the other side of the island that weren't coming. So 5 minutes pass, 10 minutes pass, boom, we have this interaction with these kids. And I'm like, what do we do? I said, bring out this pen and paper. All I know is delay as long as possible until something happens, right? And so I'm like, okay, let's draw out how this thing's going to be. So I start with the easy stuff. How is your compound going to be laid out? Where are you going to keep the kids? Where is these guys coming in? Everything else. Still, no agents came. I'm like, okay, let's go deeper in this business plan. Let's do a little spreadsheet here. Right? How much? Let's talk about your customers. Do you have enough customers? Where do you get them from? How do you connect with them? And so writing all this stuff down was really informative to us of really how that industry was going. I get through that, and this is where we found out that they wanted to charge $100,000 per person and how much extra and everything else. And then still the agents weren't there. I'm like, how do I deal with this? I said, okay, let's talk about your product. Now, when the product is kids,
yeah,
that's a difficult conversation, right? And so I says, okay, here's my top line. Here's your revenue coming in. Now let's talk about the cost of goods, right? So, how much does it cost for a little Colombian? Female. How much does it cost for, what about, and there's like $2,500 there, and we're writing all these things. I said, what about, an American? You have a little blonde American coming down. What does it cost for you to get one of those as part of your inventory? It's like $25,000. It was multiples of it. And I'm writing all this down. I'm thinking, okay, this is our cost of goods. Now what extra are you charging? Now, this part you may edit out, but I'm just going to go there. You can decide what you want to do with it. This, I said, okay, this is how much you charge for the fees. What about the 0 kilometer miles? You charge me $2,000 for that one, $5,000 for that one. Is that just because you were taking advantage of me because I have money? Or is that really what you charge? He goes, no, that's really what we charge for ones that age and the 0 kilometer. I said, okay, after the first time, does it drop to 500? Does it drop to 1,000? What does it drop to? The female trafficker said, oh no, we can sell them as 0 kilometers more than once. I said, how does that happen? How do you do that? She goes, she said, it only costs $200 to sew back their hymen. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what the fuck?
All right.
How does somebody get so disconnected from humanity to think that's okay ever? To think that selling these children is okay ever? It was so dark. I was suffocating in the conversation. I thought, how can I deal with this level? I just wanted to shoot them all right there. Right. I'm like, how do we deal with this? And, I changed the conversation, and finally I'm like, how do we delay some more? Finally, I couldn't deal with this conversation anymore. I was done with this conversation. I said, you know what? I said, you guys have proven to me that you know your market. You've proven to me that you have the access to the inventory, you have access to the product, you have access to the customers. It sounds like this could be really profitable. I says, I'm willing to put in the money. I said, but I want 55%. I want controlling interest in everything. That leaves 45% for the rest of you guys. And there was a bunch of traffickers that were there. And I pointed at one of them, Edouard, who had actually own the property they wanted to develop. But I said, you've done the most, you're most involved with this. I think that you should get, of that 45%, you should probably get 30% of that. I said, that leaves about 15% for the rest of them. And all of a sudden, these guys start getting pissed, but not at me, at him. I'm like, oh, good, I can back away from this situation. I said,
what are you thinking? You don't know that these people, that these, whatever, the SWAT or whoever's going to swarm in, you don't know that they're ever coming.
I don't.
Are you not thinking, I got to back out of this situation? Like, how do I get myself out of this room?
The good thing is, before they even got on the boats to come out, I knew that the Navy SEALs that were there said, listen, this is a big party for Pablo. No guns, no knives, no problem, right? So they had taken all of the weapons, supposedly, hopefully, had taken all of the weapons. They even checked the girls' purses, the kids' purses, before they came to make sure there wasn't any weapons there. So I knew there was no weapons, number one. Number two, I had a whole bunch of my buddies that were hanging out in the park, in the pool and all around. They were former Navy SEALs, Green Berets. I've got a guy hit there that was a triple black belt Krav Maga. I don't know if you've ever heard of Krav. But no. It's Israeli Special Forces, hand-to-hand combat. It's the most lethal on earth. So it's one of the reasons why I got so involved with it is my training with him. So I knew we could handle it if it went bad, but we had no idea when they were coming.
If at all, remove the danger. If there's no danger at all, it doesn't matter. You can't continue the charade forever. Is there any way for you to get a phone and call somebody and say, what the fuck are you?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Well, we had one of the other operators that, kind of walked away and he was trying to figure, but he couldn't communicate that with me.
Yeah.
Because I'm literally face to face with these guys. So I'm just there. My role was delay. And so I said, okay, guys, I'm going to take 55% of this deal. I think that Edouard should take 30%. You guys got another 15, work that. And all of a sudden they start fighting. And they're like, I says, you know what? Why don't we work that out right now? You guys negotiate. And so they started just arguing with each other about who was going to get what percentage of the company and whatever else. It was almost 10, 15-minute argument between all of these guys when suddenly, boom, from all directions. We've got SWAT guys coming in, on the ground. I've got videos and stuff of this.
I was going to say, and all this is being recorded. So it's not like these guys can say, man, I was just sitting here with Bob. No, you're arguing for your 10% or your 5% or 3%.
Exactly. So these guys are throwing us on the ground. Now these guys, I get thrown on the ground too. The guy behind me, my security, we called him La Sombra, the shadow. Boom, he takes me down. He's kind of protecting me, so to speak. I'm laying there on the hot sand. I've got ants crawling on my face. I was incredibly grateful to be laying on the hot sand with ants than to be in that conversation one more second.
Right.
And these guys are all, they put them separate. We were all laying there over on the beach area, and they're interrogating them. And about 30 Child Protective Services people came in with the children, and they were trying to settle them down, and they took these guys off with handcuffs. They put them all on the boats and got them out fairly quickly, so that they could let up on us a little bit after the traffickers were out. But we still they weren't supposed to tell the kids that we were the good guys because we don't know how involved things were. And so I had to go to the bathroom. I got up and they came around the outside, and this bathroom area was it was kind of a grass roof, but you could hear what was going on over in the main area room where the children were. Mm-hmm. And these Child Protective Services people were in there with the kids, and I could hear them laughing with the kids, singing with the kids. And that sound of freedom, mm-hmm. This is why we named the movie Sound of Freedom. That sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard, especially compared to the crying that we heard less than 45 minutes before. And I started crying. I turned to the operator who was with me. I said, I spent my whole life making money, making rich people richer. I want to make a difference. I want to be involved. I want to help. I want to write bigger checks. What can I do? And he said, Paul, and sadly, there's a lot of demand for stuff like this. It's coming from guys like Jeffrey Epstein. He said, it's coming from guys who, don't take this wrong, Paul, but they dress and talk and act just like you. Mm-hmm. He said, I can't teach my Navy SEALs how to, wear that suit and have that aura. He said, if you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life. So that was the beginning of what ended up being 70 plus undercover missions, FBI agents knocking on my door and, dealing with ex-cons, escaped convicts that were in different countries that were selling, this inventory. It was 10 years then of undercover work. I retired from my job, took down everything relating to Paul Hutchinson online, put together a fake profile. In fact, you'll love this story. So I went to my personal assistant and I said, Kitty. Now, Kitty's brilliant. She can type faster than I can think. She's just brilliant woman. And I said, Kitty, here's what I need. I need everything about me online. Take it down. Everything. Whatever you have to do, whoever you have to pay, take everything down online. I said, I don't want my face anywhere. I said, nothing with my face tied to Paul Hutchinson online. I still have to have stuff with, me being the owner of the companies and stuff on there, but nothing with my face. I said, but I've got all these pictures of me with Lambos and Ferraris and jets and yachts and everything else. Create a fake profile on Facebook, on Instagram, everything, a fake profile. I said, I want to stay as Paul because I don't want to have somebody say, hey, Steve, and have me not turn. So there's a million Pauls out there. So I'm going to stay as Paul. But I said, put together a fake profile under the name Paul Johnson. And she's sitting there typing, and she stops. And she looks up at me and she said, you have a chance to redefine yourself.
You're going with Johnson.
And you're going with Paul Johnson. Yeah. Exactly. She said, how about Paul Stone? And she puts together this Paul Stone profile. And, and I knew that these guys, some of them were pretty in depth about, their background checks and everything else. So, we had some people put together a fake web page with a bunch of links coming into it. My web page for Paul Stone and Paul Stone Capital was as good as my regular business web pages. And it was deep and it was on point. I had a fake phone number, a fake address, everything else. I didn't live in Utah. I lived in California. I didn't run Bridge. I run Paul Stone Capital, like all of these different things. And I'm like, okay, we've got to figure out how to have real followers, real friends with Paul Stone, but I can't have anybody that's tied to the real me whatsoever. So I went on and I said, okay, and a lot of this stuff I came up with. The CIA guys, none of these guys helped me work the fake profile. So I went on and I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. When I go onto Facebook and I tell them my job of wherever I worked, it throws up suggestions of people who worked at that same job. So I went online and found some seedy modeling agencies, some lingerie modeling agencies in Latin America, and said that I was a talent scout for these modeling agencies or a photographer for these modeling agencies, and boom, as my job. And it would show up a bunch of people that were suggestions as friends. And then I'd friend request them and they'd say, oh, he's a model scout for this modeling thing. So they would accept my friend request. And then I would go in and find friends of theirs because now we have friends in common.
Right.
Literally within a couple weeks, I had 700 friends. They were all scantily dressed models and thugs throughout Latin America with zero connection with Paul Hutchinson.
I would say exactly the kind of friends that a weirdo
would have.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And they wanted to be friends with me because they look on there and I've got pictures with me with Lambos and Ferraris and jets, this lifestyle that they're like, oh, this is a badass. And so, boom, I build up this fake profile online that looked really legit. With if you've got even just 700 friends, you don't have to have hundreds of thousands. You got 700 friends that are all dressed like that and looking like that, then you check out to most people.
It all supports everything.
Yeah,
and you can always try and connect like your website to the Instagram, which just keeps re-supporting. You know what I'm saying? Over and over. So these guys find this link. Oh, look, he's also got a website. Oh, look, he's also got a LinkedIn.
Exactly.
And it's all supportive. And they're like, oh, he's absolutely legit.
Exactly. In fact, years later, I had done some undercover work in Cancun. And one of the guys was an escaped convict from the U.S. that was just doing some horrific things across the border. And the op went bad. We ended up, he was at odds with another trafficking ring that was down there. He was also connected with the police, and I can tell that story later about how we got arrested for real down there. But the story here about my profile, I was so careful I even logged in using VPNs on everything. My burner phone was one that I went through on a Google voice, forwarding and everything else. I was really, really careful because I didn't know how high level these guys were in my undercover profile and everything. And one day, and this was like 5 years into undercover work, I get a boom, boom, boom knock on my door. Now, I live in a very, very, very secure community. Mm-hmm. Nobody knocks on my door unless I get a call from the guard before and verifying that somebody's there. Nobody just knocks on my door ever. You don't have door-to-door guys in there. And this was my retarded house, right? This is the one that had 10 bathrooms and a basketball court in my basement, all this stuff, right? So I'm sitting there in my beautiful living room, and I go boom, boom, knock on my door, and I open the door, and there's this man standing there. I've never met him before, and I could see a gun underneath his jacket a little bit. And he said, "I'm looking for Paul Hutchinson, AKA Paul Stone." Mm. Now, nobody knew that's not good at all. Yeah. I'm like, oh shit. How did my carefully constructed life is ready to come to an end right now? I don't know what's going on here, but nobody knows that name except for the guys that are in my, and he was upset about something. He was mad. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, okay, I know how to disarm this if he goes for the gun or whatever. How do I deal with this? And I said, yeah, I'm Paul. And he reaches, good thing he wasn't reaching towards his gun side. He reached to inside of his jacket and he pulls out some papers and he gives me an FBI grand jury, a summon, mm-hmm. a subpoena to an FBI grand jury in
this is a U.S. Marshal.
Yeah.
That's how I got through the gate.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm like, okay, FBI grand jury in South California. Okay. With no other information on it at all. I'm like, okay, thank you, right. Or not. Yeah. And I called up my attorney. I said, what do I do about this? I sent him pictures of it, and he goes, let me handle this. I says, okay, and I'm laying there on the, my couch and just waiting, wonder what's going on. What did I get in trouble for? What did they find out? Right? This is a pretty big deal. And he calls me back laughing. I said, it's not funny, but I'm happy you're happy. Yeah. This is, tell me what's going on. He said, you'll never guess what happened. He said, you remember that escaped felon that you were with in Tijuana? He said, well, the FBI caught up with him and took him down. Even though, your op went bad and you couldn't finish that operation there. He said they took him down and then they ended up getting a Google subpoena to get into his phone and into his Gmail. And in his Gmail, he was emailing back and forth, coordinating this party with this guy by the name of Paul Stone. He said, so the FBI actually got a subpoena to go into Paul Stone's email to figure out who Paul Stone was. He said, they had no ability to find you. There was nothing that was tying Paul Stone to you. He said they spent a bunch of time trying to figure out who Paul Stone was so they could get him. So I had done a good enough job to even throw off the FBI, right? And he said, finally, there was one email in there that I made a mistake on. One of the traffickers had sent me some stuff that I forwarded on to a guy who was working with us who was former CIA. He was CIA for about 14 years. And I forwarded it on to his email, his personal email. So they saw a forwarded email inside Paul Stone to a former CIA guy.
So they were able to contact him, and he said, oh, this is the guy you want.
Exactly. And he said, when they contacted him and they had him under a gag order, I told him later, I said, Matt, why the hell didn't you call me and tell me? He said, I couldn't. Yeah. He said they have to go through their process. I couldn't call you at all. He said, so I told him, he says, that's Paul Hutchinson. He's led 30 plus undercover missions for us at the time. And he's really good at it. They're like, yeah, okay. So I get this grand subpoena. So I end up calling the special agent in charge in California and tell her, I give her all of the details, my interactions back and forth with the head of the federal police in Mexico, all of my interactions with this felon. And I was actually surprised that they didn't end up bringing me in with another trying to recruit me into the FBI thing. I don't care. I didn't, I like playing cop and I was perfectly happy where I was. But that told me that I did a good job in making hiding myself in the right way.
Yeah. If you have to pull the FBI and the NSA, you can't find you, you know what I'm saying? you're probably doing all right. But
Exactly.
And as far as the U.S. Marshals are concerned, like on their best day, they still have an attitude.
Exactly.
They always come off as very gruff.
Exactly.
They're not
You're
people.
going down.
They're not people pleasers.
Exactly. I'm like, I'm on your side.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't know that at all. I thought I was in trouble for something pretty big. So
yeah, and that cop knock. Bum, 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 bum. It's like, gee, bro, what are you doing?
Exactly. They don't knock nicely.
Yeah. So what happens at that point? Like, I mean, are you changing your identity every time you do a different sting operation, or are you keeping it the same? Because when these guys, because at some point these guys, when they get grabbed, even though they're grabbing you too, at some point they probably have to put it together. Like, yeah, I think this guy was in on it somehow.
Yeah. I make sure that I'm handled roughly by the feds when they take us down and whatnot. And yes, I changed from Paul Stone to Paul Steele to Paul Black. There was a bunch of different ones, but a lot of those were based on what my profile was. Paul Stone in the beginning was the wealthy guy. I wasn't going deep cover. Paul Stone was just a guy that the deep undercover guys would show my profile with the Ferraris and Lambos and everything else. This is a guy coming in paying for all of this stuff and whatever. And these guys would, they would contact all the other traffickers in the area and bring all of the inventory together at the same time. And we did major stings using that, but that was only about a year and a half. And then what happened is the foundation I was working with at the time, one of the former government agents, he came to me, he said, Paul, our board of directors wants to shut down operations because it's too dangerous to have anybody that's part of the foundation doing the deep cover. He said, you're really good at this. And I was funding everything myself. I had to actually get off of the board of directors of that foundation because I love doing the undercover work, but I was just the rich guy. I said, yeah, I'll do the deep cover, 2 a.m. in downtown Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and downtown Mexico City, connecting with these guys. But I couldn't go in as the rich guy. That would be dangerous. I needed to be working for a guy with the money, right? So I then changed to Paul Steele. And Paul Steele, he'd set up parties for a boss. However, my boss would kill me and my whole family if I, taste the candy before the party, but I have to make sure you have the candy type of a thing. And so this is how I started operating in the dark. And a lot of my really dangerous operations came from there. In fact, the one I just told you about the FBI coming, when I had received a phone call, a few months before from the head of the federal police in Mexico. And he said, Paul, there's a lot of trafficking coming across the border into Mexicali, into Tijuana. He said, I'd love to have your team help us. So I wasn't working for the U.S. State Department. I was working with the federal agents in the countries that we were at, because a lot of these traffickers, if you're a white guy down there with an attitude, they'll bring out all of their stuff. And it was really easy for us to capture the attention of the traffickers, where some Latino, some Mexican undercover guy, that wouldn't work as well. And so when we were down there, it was literally within an hour or two, we were able to connect with this felon, the one that the FBI eventually got. But then we wanted to make sure we connected with all of the traffickers in the area. And so we were working with some others, and we were told that this other trafficker had a hotel that was known in the area for a place that you can buy, those kind of models. And so we were at that hotel. One of his guys had brought us there. We were waiting inside for him to bring us a 9 and 11-year-old so we could verify he had what our boss wanted. It was 2 a.m. Tijuana at the time was the highest murder capita rate in the world of any city, right? And it's at 2 a.m. in an area, the most dangerous part of the city, sitting inside this hotel that is owned by a trafficker. And so we're sitting in there, and one of my security guys, one of my Krav Maga trainers, he's like, Paul, he said, this is a kill zone. He said, we can't stay in here. There's no back way. He says that the back way is barred off. He said, their only way out is the front. He said, we can't stay here. So I'm like, okay, well, so we walk out front. And as we're out front, because we're waiting outside for him to bring, the models for us to see. And it was about 2 a.m. And there's a police officer that drives up. He rolls down his window he said, you guys want to ride? We're like, no, we're good. He says, what are you doing? I said, we're just waiting for our Uber. Yeah, right. 5 white guys in that part of town at 2 a.m. Right? We're up to no good for sure.
Do they have Uber at Tijuana?
So he says, okay. And he goes around the corner, and about 1 or 2 minutes later, poof, from all directions, 7 police officers on the ground. We're like, shit, okay.
Shakedown.
Yeah, shakedown. So we're getting arrested there. Now, what we found out is that he was actually the other trafficker that formed the escaped felon. He was friends with the head of the police down there, right? So we get arrested. We get put in these couple cars, me and my other operators, and immediately he turns around. He said, this is very bad for you. He said, it's going to cost you at least $50,000 and 6 months of your life in prison here, paying off judges, whatever you have to do to get out. He said, or you pay me $10,000 right now. He said, you pay me $10,000, I'll make this all go away. We'll just stop at the next stop sign. He says, trust me, this isn't for me. I have to use it to keep my streets safe. I'm going to use it to pay my officers, right?
You're a humanitarian.
And I'm like, yeah, right. I said, oh, I don't have all that on me right now. He goes, give me what you have, and I'm handcuffed here. And he says, tell you what, give me your phone. Give me your phone. So, I've got my handcuff here, and I'm handcuffed to my security guy, and pull out my phone. I hand it to him. He said, unlock it. I said, you know what? I need to make a phone call. I'm going to call my attorney. He said, you don't get an attorney. He says, you don't even get a phone call. You're in Mexico. He said, see that building? That's a Mexican prison. He said, how about this? I put you and your guys in there. 4 days from now, you decide if you want to unlock your phone for me.
You'll be begging to unlock your phone.
Exactly. I'm like, okay. So I unlock my phone for him, and it's my burner phone, but it's the one I use on the undercover missions. And he's going through. He's going, show me your pictures. He's going through my web history and stuff. I says, I don't look. This is bullshit. You're looking for a S party with kids. Of course, you got that on your phone. And there's nothing there. And he goes, and then he starts going through my pictures, my folders on my phone. And he opens up this one called Cancun. And it was the operation we had done a little bit before. And it had some of the pictures of what the traffickers had sent me. Now, they're fully clothed, but they're obviously 11, 12 years old, right? And he's like, oh, this is all I need. This is all I need right here. You're going to prison right now. And my agent who was handcuffed to me, he goes, do you think we should blow our cover? I said, yeah, maybe we should. I mean, we had just literally been in the city only last day, right? I said, sir, why don't you go to that next folder, click that next folder, and zoom in on that picture. I said, and it's me with my other operators, and it's the top federal agents in Mexico that they were all posing with us after the end of the sting that we did in Colombia or in Cancun. And so they're all there. I says, that's me right there. Those are my other office operators in the other car. Those are the top federal agents in Mexico. And now go to that next picture. It goes in the next one. I said, that's me with President Vicente Fox. I'm in his office on the red phone, right? Mm-hmm. I said, I help your country find children. Now, at this point, this was really our only way out, because if he knew that I was there on authorization from the head of the federal police in the Mexico, and he needed to comply really fast. So
now he owes you $10,000.
Exactly.
I'm going to need everything you've got. Give me your phone.
Exactly. So he stops the car. Boom. The other car stops behind. He gets out, unhandcuffs us, and the other ones. He's like, "Can I take you guys somewhere? Where can I take you?" And we're like, "No, we're good. Right? We're good." We go to our hotel, and at that point, we knew that our cover was blown. Mm-hmm. Because obviously, he was dirty. He was working with the other traffickers and stuff. We're over. We have to get out of town. We end up going down to Ensenada and down to Rosarita Beach and some others, and that was a whole other crazy story down there. But that was why that operation got blown, and why a few months later I get a knock on my door from the FBI agent saying, and the case that, fortunately, I'm super happy that they ended up taking down that felon. Because it made me sad. There was a number of operations, of those 70 missions we did, there was a number of operations that didn't turn out as good as what we filmed on The Sound of Freedom, right? There was a lot of them where the bad guys got away. There was some of them where I had operators that got killed. I had one operator that got stabbed 27 times in the Dominican Republic. He ended up making it. I had another operator in Haiti who didn't make it. In fact, I actually met my wife at his funeral. I had done 12 undercover missions in Haiti, and we had taken down the largest trafficking rings in the Caribbean, along with 4 corrupt federal judges as part of it. And it was so high level, it was really dangerous. Haiti's already dangerous. And Jim ended up not making it. I was at his funeral when I met my wife.
Can I ask a question? Is that when you go into these areas, I mean, you're going into another country, like, are you guys, and I understand you're at some point you're communicating with the locals, but you're not really telling the local law enforcement you're coming in until you have to, because otherwise you're not getting anywhere. Are you going in there, and are these guys that are with you armed?
No.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so they're going in unarmed.
Yeah, unarmed.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And that's the reason why guys like Joseph. So Joseph is double black belt Krav Maga. He's actually, I don't know what his black belt is now, but
and that's great. But if the other guy's got an AK-47,
exactly, then you're done. Yeah. If you're really, our strength is knowing what to say at the right time. If they knew who we were in an instant, we would have been gone. We had no firepower to be able to handle it if things went bad. In fact, interesting on that. So we were in Mexico City, and we had identified some rings that were trafficking their kids in from Tenancinga, which is a really, really dangerous part of Mexico, trafficking them into a place into Puerto Vallarta. And so we had followed that ring, and so we flew into Puerto Vallarta, and I had spent almost 4 months in undercover. I would go in for a weekend, connect with some traffickers, fly out, go back in, connect with some traffickers, and it was a cesspool of trafficking going on. We had identified 48 children. We had identified 9 traffickers that were, and we needed to figure out how, if we just take down one of them, the rest of them just disappear and we lose those kids. So we have to stay in undercover long enough to find out everybody who's involved, get them to bring everybody to the same place at the same time. One of the traffickers, we called him Scarface. He had this huge scar that was going all the way down his neck. And I had connected with him through a taxi driver who had worked with the cartel down there, who had introduced me to this guy and got us in that ring. And this guy was selling a lot of, he was a bad dude.
Right.
And it was about 4 days before the sting. I didn't trust any of the local police at all. We were so high level with the traffickers there that I'm sure that a lot of them were on payroll with the traffickers. And so we flew 2 federal agents from Mexico City to come and help us set up the final parts of the sting. And we're there in the hotel, and I'm calling each one of the guys that I had, all of the traffickers I connected with over the years, or over the last 4 months, sorry. And I got a hold of all of them except for Scarface. His phone was dead. And I'm like, guys, we have to get this guy. He is incredibly dangerous, and he has to go to prison forever. So I don't have his phone number. I don't have the taxi driver's phone number, but I know the area that I first met him. So you guys, the 2 federal agents, stay here in the hotel. I'm going to go out with a couple of my guys. We're going to go out to the dark area. We're going to reconnect with him through the same sources we did in the beginning. So we're out there, we're talking to some, taxi drivers in this super dark area of town. I says, hey, do you know this guy? Oh yeah, I know him. Hey, have him call me. Tell him Pablo's in town. Tell him, I'll give you $100 if he calls me. He'll be happy because we're having the party and he'll want to know about it. Okay. So boom, sure enough, he calls me. And he says, hey, meet me at the boardwalk. Okay, we'll meet you there. I give you $100 to the taxi driver, and we're sitting there at the boardwalk waiting for him. We're sitting, waiting, and all of a sudden, just like what happened in Tijuana, from all directions. Now, this time we had 10 officers, full automatic weapons on us. On the ground. We're like, shit, okay. So we're getting handcuffed. Now, I know that half the cops in that area are dirty, right? So we're getting handcuffed, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know if these are dirty cops. I don't know if they're clean cops. Either way, hopefully they take us to the jail. And I would rather spend 3 days in a Mexican prison. At this point, I had worked long enough on this case. I would rather spend 3 days in a Mexican prison than to lose those 48 kids, right? And so they throw us on the ground. They're handcuffed us. I can show you some videos later. I mean, the handcuffs were so tight, I still have nerve damage. If I just touch right here, this all just tingles, right? All the way up my hand. And so where they throw us on the ground and they pick us up, they put us in the back of the police pickup trucks. You know, the ones that have the benches on the side and the guys are holding all the guns there right on the side. And we're laying there on the ground. We've got cop cars in the front and the back. And I'm thinking, okay, they'll take us to the jail. The 2 federal officers that are at my hotel, they'll see we're gone after a bit and they'll find out about it. Maybe they can be our phone call. I don't know. And they'll come and they'll say, "Hey, this is a federal case. We need to take over, and nobody will know, right? We'll be good." Well, they don't take us to the jail. They start taking us out in the desert, right? They start taking us to no lights, no. This is where shit goes down, right? And at this point, I'm as scared for the police as I am for us. So here's why. Let me paint the picture of Joseph. Joseph is one of only 10 that I know of Krav Maga trainers that's qualified to train the trainers. And for the audience who doesn't know Krav, regular martial arts and karate, jiu-jitsu, bow to your sensei, 3 points when you kick him in the leg, right? It's a sports type of defense. You don't train against kick him in the balls, poking their eyes out. Krav Maga is brick to their head, go home to your family. Israeli Special Forces, hand-to-hand combat, most lethal on earth. Every move, they don't talk, they don't see, they don't walk, they don't breathe, they're done, right? I can take away a gun faster than they can pull the trigger every single time. We've trained hundreds and hundreds of iterations of every single angle just so that you have muscle memory on everything. Well, my trainer was Joseph, one of the best in the world, qualified, and I think he's the only non-Israeli qualified to go back to Israel and train them. Well, Joseph was with me and Jimmy and Joseph, and Joseph was there. And he had 3 tequilas at dinner that night. And he was a little bit tipsy. So when they threw us on the ground and they were handcuffing us, he's laying there. He's like, "I'm going to fucking kill him." I said, "Bro, you can't kill him, right? We don't know if they're good cops." He says, "They're bad cops. I know they're bad cops, right?" And they pick us up and they throw us in the back of the pickup truck and they start going out of the city. Joseph's getting madder by the second. Me and Jimmy are like, "Joseph, shut up. We've got M16s to our heads. We're both handcuffed right now. Shut up." He's like, "You guys better let us go now. We're going to take you all out," right? Shut up. So finally the truck stops. They get out and the police come back. We've got a guy with a couple guys with guns. We've got a guy with batons. They're pulling us out. And one of them says to me, he says, "You're asking for Scarface?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I arrested him myself for selling children." He said, "Now you're going to tell me everything." And I said, "I'm really happy you said that." Right. I said, "Now," because that told me they were good cops, right? I said, "I'm really happy you said that. Now I can tell you who I really am." I said, "We have 2 federal agents at our hotel room." He goes, "Bullshit." He says, "No." I said, "Give me my phone. We'll call him right now." He says, "You're not getting your phone. You're going to tell me everything." He's got a baton. And Joseph's like, "It's going down." I said, "Joseph, shut up. These guys are good cops, right? Just shut up, right?" I said, "Guys, before anything happens," and I'm handcuffed, right? In my pants, my undercover pants, I had, remember those pants where you can zip off the shorts, so they turn into shorts, long pants to shorts. So it has a zipper kind of halfway down the knee, right? So I says, "Guys, somebody has to unzip part of that." I had a hidden pocket that was inside of it. I says, "Somebody has to unzip that right now. And so somebody unzipped it. And inside of it, I had a laminated card. It was my picture. It was signed by the head of the federal police. Basically, if they don't give me their car, their guns, they go to jail, right? It's the best get out of jail free card anywhere. He looks at it and he's like, takes it to the chief of police that's up in the front car. And he comes out, shaking. They unhandcuff us faster than we were handcuffed, all 10 of them. But their hand, we're lo siento, we're so sorry, we're so sorry. I said, "No, this is how you should treat people who are buying children in your country." I said, "But you should take them out in the desert and beat them up. Kill him, whatever you have to do. I'm fine with that. They're wasting my oxygen." I said, "But I don't know who to trust." Mm-hmm. I said, "If anybody of your 10 agents, if anybody says anything to anybody that I just showed you that card, your entire department's under investigation. Do you understand?" He goes, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." So 4 days later, largest child rescue mission in Mexico history with the 48 children. But it was a close call.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I probably still would have been like, "Yeah, we got to go."
Yeah,
one of these guys is going to talk. They're going to say something to somebody. You know what I'm saying? You could end up getting, the cartel will go down and just gun down everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very risky.
So, of course, that's the last time I've ever entered Puerto Vallarta.
Right.
Most of these cities,
I do have a question.
Sure.
So everybody's seen the movie Taken, right? Um, so how are they getting a hold of, let's say, the product? Like, in that movie, of course, those are teen girls, but how are these guys going into a very poor community and going to their families and saying, look, you got too many kids. Let me, this 9-year-old or 11-year-old, let me give you $200 and I'll just take her. She's a burden to you. We're gonna have her go and she's gonna work on a farm with puppies and all the bullshit that they say to justify what you're about to do, so you can feel good about it. Or she's gonna go live with a rich family or whatever they tell them. And here's $200 from the rich family and whatever justification they need to give you or their family. Or is it they pull up in a van, throw a bag over their head and yank them in the van and hit them with a taser, and they wake up in a city somewhere or in a warehouse somewhere, chained to a bed. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm wondering where are they coming from?
Yeah. Well, and the majority of children don't come from a healthy family. Okay. People will leave Sound of Freedom and they'll be like, oh, I want to do something. I want to go undercover. I want to help rescue kids. Well, the worst thing you can do is go to Mexico and try to do a child rescue mission. You're going to get shot. Yeah. Right. You're probably going to get arrested. The best thing you can do is go home and hug your children. And people are like, well, how does hugging my children help it? Well, creating that strong nuclear family is everything. The majority of children who are being taken to other countries and sold like what we saw Undercover, the majority of those children come from broken homes, runaways, a broken foster care program. It's a very, very broken foster care program. And in doing so, these kids are abused. Now, here's the other thing that's super important to understand for parents of affluent or even healthy families in any way. The majority of children who are being sold for these unthinkable acts sleep in their own beds at night, and their parents have no idea. Okay. Yeah. So for example, we in third world countries and even here in the U.S., for example, we were in Acapulco, and one of the little kids, she was 12. She just turned 13 years old. Her babysitter was her aunt. Her aunt was working with the traffickers. Her aunt was babysitting her and showing her pictures, and her aunt told her, listen, you're going to lose your virginity sometime anyway. Lose it to one of these rich Americans. You'll earn $500. She was charging us $5,000 for this child, right? And the mother had no idea what was going on. This happens a lot. In fact, you need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say when something's off. Be able to say, hey, Dad, I don't like it when you tell me I have to hug Uncle Harry because, he touches me weird and he tells us we should have secrets outside of you, or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother is taking pictures of us when we're changing, and now he tells us he's going to use those pictures and send them around the school if we don't do other things with him as friends later, or I don't like this babysitter. She's showing us pictures, tells us that we should trust her more than you. These are grooming behaviors, and 92% of the abuse of children comes from familial members, somebody in their family, somebody they know, and some of those are actually being trafficked. They're being using monetary exchange for what they're doing with the children, which is just horrific. Either way, monetary or not, it's still bad for the kids, right? And there's some things that, like right now, there's something that parents need to be aware of we call it sextortion, right? Where you get something and then you control the victim. Yeah. That sextortion can happen not only with a known predator, but somebody that your 13-year-old thinks is another 13-year-old that's really not online, convinces them to send some pictures and then uses that as leverage to do more and more and more. Or there's actually AI programs today that are what they call nudify programs, that you can literally take any actress, any actor, anywhere, and boom, take off their clothes, and it gives you a realistic picture of them nude. Those programs are being used to do the same thing with adolescents, and then using that picture that wasn't even a real picture in the first place to create this extortion type of a thing and convince them to do other stuff. And so this happens a lot. Now, yes, there are children taken from healthy families. It's I didn't say wealthy families. I said healthy ones. This is usually in Latin America. And I don't want to get political here, but I will say this. The last number of years, there's been 130,000 children, unaccompanied minors, children coming across the open border. And I've served a lot in Latin America. And almost every single day in cities throughout Latin America, children are being taken from a healthy family. They don't have the resources to follow up on what's going on. And just like what you see in the Sound of Freedom movie, they're controlling these children. Like this little boy who, you don't want something bad to happen to your sister, do you? You're going to do exactly what we say. And these kids are drugged, they're abused, and they're controlled through fear. I know where your mother lives. I know where your sister goes to school. And less than 2 or 3 weeks after they are taken, they can show up on the border with a name tag and an address, with a phone number and address of their new, quote, sponsor. And those sponsors don't have FBI background checks. There's no guarantee that they have any connection to that child whatsoever. And because of the fact that remember my very first mission, it was going to cost them $25,000 to get a little American down here for the demand. They now realize that they could take the supply to the demand, bringing it across the border. And the United States is the #1 producer and consumer of child pictures in the world. And because of that, it's kind of a gateway into it. These guys that, they get addicted to hardcore pictures and they need something harder to have that same fix. Pretty soon they're fantasizing about something they wouldn't have even thought was attractive 5 years ago. And then they're acting out on these horrific fantasies. And it's creating a tsunami of demand that a lot of it's coming from the United States. On the Haiti rescue, I had done a bunch of deep cover work in Haiti. And we were tired of the trafficking continuing to come up. We wanted to cut the head off the dragon, right? So, following up, finding really where the traffickers going. And it culminated in this sting operation that was on this beach area. And we had a private yacht. One of my investors in my investment fund had said, "Hey, Paul, if you ever want to use my yacht for one of your things, you just let me know." And so this was an opportunity because we had a high-level celebrity that wanted to see it as well. And we're like, okay, we have to keep him away from the traffickers, but we have to let him see it. And so we had this yacht literally docked right off the coast. And this nice yacht, this 52-foot wide catamaran. He toured around the world in this thing. And I had done a bunch of deep cover, showed up with traffickers. They brought about 34 kids with them, but they represented hundreds and hundreds of more. So we were there, and they, let me figure out. So I told the traffickers, we're going to go see the big boss out on the yacht. No guns, no knives, no problem, right? So we take off all of their weapons and stuff. We get on this dinghy, go out there, have our undercover cameras there recording what they're saying. Had the big boss was kind of hanging back on a couch with a beautiful woman waving him, and we have our Navy SEALs there. Captured all that we needed to. Get back on the dinghy, goes back to the beach. We're in this enclosed area in this house. Put all the children in a safe place. They're in a little cabana. They've got ice cream and drinks, etc. We're there negotiating with the traffickers about what's going on, waiting for the federal agents to come in. And at this point, we had a guy who used to be a pretty high position at Homeland Security who was now working with the foundation at the time. And he was on the yacht with us, and he said, "Hey, he had convinced whoever was in charge at the time that he wanted to come and actually be part of the sting and see how that works." So when we put the traffickers back on the dinghy and start heading back, he gets on the boat with us. I'm like, bro, this guy hasn't had any field experience, but okay, he's man in charge. He was now the new president of that, whatever. So they go back into the beach. We get out. We're there negotiating with the traffickers. Boom, the agents come in from all sides. Boom, blowing the door. They bust in the door, and then we're thrown on the ground. We're getting handcuffed. They run out of handcuffs. They had so many traffickers there. They ran out of handcuffs, and so they zip tie me and him. And I've got not little ones, a big fat. I can get out a little hand, and they're behind my back. So I'm zip tied back there. And the agent who was on top of me didn't know I was a good guy.
Right.
And so he's patting me down. And usually on these rescue missions, on the day of the sting, I'll send all of my luggage and everything to the airport beforehand. So when they throw me in the police car, they take us, instead of going to the jail, they take us right to the airport. Boom, we're out of country. Well, in order to do that, I keep my passport on an inner pocket. That's the only time I ever have a real identification of me is on the day of the sting itself. So I got this passport in my inside pocket, and this agent didn't know I was a good guy. Throws us on the ground and puts zip ties on us, and then patting me down, feels my passport on the inside, goes in and gets my passport out and throws it on the evidence pile, all the traffickers' stuff. I'm like, that's my real passport. I can't say anything.
Right.
The traffickers are right there. And then they pick us up, they take us out, and boom, I get hit on the side of the face by a rock. And all of a sudden there's all this gravel, these rocks. The locals had found out that there was one of these parties going on. Right. They were pissed. And so they were throwing rocks at us because they, of course, didn't know that we were good guys either, right? And this federal agent didn't. And so there was a Haitian federal agent. So he takes us out, boom, puts us in the back of a police car where the head of the federal police was in there. He's our friend. He knows us, right? And boom, the locals are like, boom, 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 pounding on the outside of the car. I'm there with this former HSI guy, and he had never been in this kind of stuff before, and he's pissing his pants, right? He's like, boom, pounding on the back of the car. Boom, he pulls out of there and gets to safety, away from all the crowd and everything else. He says, okay, I've got handcuff keys. And I'm like, oh, you know what? We don't have handcuffs. We've got zip ties. He said, well, I don't have a knife or pliers on me. You have to deal with that. I said, we have a bigger problem than that. I said, my passport is back there on the evidence pile. The agent just pulled it out and put it up there. He says, well, we can't go back there. That's a war zone. I said, I know. He said, we have to wait until it all comes back to the police headquarters. So we drive to the police headquarters. The plane's waiting for me. We had a private plane to get us out of there at the time. And finally, all of the stuff comes. Boom, we get on the plane, and it was beautiful. We get back to the U.S. 2 weeks later.
You got your passport.
Yeah, they gave it to me because we waited at the police center. So we got the passport. Yeah, we waited there at the police center. Boom, got the passport, got on the plane, got back to the U.S. 2 weeks later, we find out that 4 corrupt federal judges let the traffickers out of prison and let all the kids back out. I mean, they're some of the kids were in safe places and whatever, but now these traffickers are still out there with some of the other ones, and their excuse of why they let them out is that the real bad guy got away. The real bad guy was that American that was here trying to set up the party. This is what the federal judges were saying, right? But it wasn't Paul Stone. It wasn't Paul Steele. It wasn't Paul Black. It was Paul Hutchinson. What happened is I didn't know this, but they had taken my passport before I got it back, and somebody had entered it in with all of the evidence. So they literally had my real information.
Right.
So at this point, Paul Hutchinson becomes the equivalent of Haiti's Most Wanted, right? I'm like, oh, now I can't ever go. I didn't ever want to go back anyway, right? So we had to fly the first lady, the head of the federal police, the attorney general, flew them to the U.S. I presented all of the stuff together with some of the operators there of exactly what happened with that operation. Every single text and stuff back and forth with these guys, and the head of the federal police, he stands up. He said, I don't care if I lose my job. I don't care if I lose my life. I'm going to fix the corruption in my country. And they went back in. They rearrested the traffickers, took down these 4 federal judges, and by then I'm done. Sadly, that officer was the one that got high enough where the assassination of the president, the burning of the things in the streets, a lot of that was a power struggle that we opened up this Pandora's box to expose everybody who is doing the most nefarious things in the Caribbean, operating from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so it got worse and worse and worse. That operator ended up getting killed. And I was, that very last time I said, okay, I'll go to Haiti one more time. I'll go for his funeral. And so I was at his funeral, and I'm back at the airport getting ready to leave, last time in Haiti, and in the line behind me is this beautiful woman. And I tell people meeting a beautiful Colombian actress is kind of cool, but when she's donating her time at an orphanage in Haiti, that's amazing. And I found out that she had been doing a medical charity mission and working with some of the kids that we had even rescued. She had no idea who I was because I had been doing Undercover, but she knew about the foundation. She even knew about the movie because she was Colombian. She knew about that big rescue mission that we did in Colombia, et cetera. And so we spoke all the way until the plane came. She was in the chair right behind me on the way back on the plane, and we talked the whole way home. And she's now my wife. And so that was the most beautiful part of coming out of Colombia or coming out of Haiti, is to meet the woman of my dreams. I have to tell you the side story. This is funny as crap. So at the time, she was. Have you ever heard of Henry Cavill? Henry Cavill is the actor who plays Superman, right? So the Batman Superman, he's the good-looking one, not the one that fell off the horse and got neck injury. Yeah, that was a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
So, but Henry Cavill, the GQ Superman. So Henry was at her work.
Have they had an unattractive Superman? Is there an unattractive one?
This is the more recent.
This is more recent. The last two have been pretty over the top.
Exactly. So he was at Vanessa's work almost every day.
Right.
For about 3 months. They started to date. Nothing big in public, but they went on like 3 or 4 dates. And then she met me. I stole Superman's girlfriend. That was my mic drop right there. Not rescuing the kids and building a company, but now we run healing retreats. She's the executive director of the Child Liberation Foundation, which helps with the rehabilitation of the kids and programs to keep them safe, et cetera.
And this is, and are you still what you're? I'd say you're no good for undercover work.
No, I had to stop. Yeah. What happened is the movie Sound of Freedom was dead in the water. 5 years after it came out, after we finished it, there was no distribution whatsoever. And my wife, my daughter, my kids are like, you know what, Dad, you're good at doing this undercover work, but if we're not going to create awareness with the movie, we maybe need to have you go public. And I pushed against it for a long time. I said, this is more dangerous for you guys now if that happens. If I go public at all. And I went on my first podcast and got shared tens of thousands. It was just a small podcast, but he got shared tens of thousands of times within the first couple of weeks, and he only had a few thousand followers. And so, and then it ended up gaining some pretty good traction. So I got on another podcast and another one, and less than 2 months later, Angel Studios picked up the contract on Sound of Freedom, and then it became a global success. And then I've had the opportunity to be on a lot of bigger podcasts with the Soft White Underbelly and Jordan. There's a bunch of really big ones out there.
Mark Leda.
Mark Leda, yeah, was in Mark's just 3 weeks ago, so it hasn't come out yet. But
where did you do the podcast?
That with Mark?
Yeah,
it was in his studio. It was in Los Angeles.
But where was it located? Was it so when I did his podcast, it was on Skid Row. It was on Skid Row.
Yeah, he's moved it. It's in a little bit.
Yeah,
well, actually it's
not far.
It's not far. It's downtown LA. It's a secure area, but it's not on Skid Row like
it was.
What he had before.
It was rough. It was rough. You could hear the sirens in the back, people screaming outside, the whole thing. It was rough. And I always joked because I had watched a couple of the videos prior to that. Like my wife watches them all the time. I just can't. But you could hear the sirens and people screaming in the background on the videos, and I thought, boy, he's got like background sounds he puts in there. And no, these are two junkies screaming outside the door and an ambulance going by or the police. So when I was doing it, I was like, my God. And I remember he had me stop a few times and I was like, oh, I thought you wanted that. He's, this
a little bit much.
Yours isn't that kind of, but he's so good. Like the quality, the everything. He's such a professional, and a perfectionist, and kind of like he's one of those guys that, I always say, like yourself, it's, like somebody has to work at the food bank.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it, but somebody needs to. And I'm always like, thank God for those guys. Cause I can't do it. Like, but he would, and you could see like everybody knew him down there. Mm-hmm. He's amazing. I'm super impressed by him.
Yeah.
For some reason. I don't know why.
Well, and he's built a huge audience.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that. It's that I think he's just doing something like, it's kind of the same thing. He made a bunch of money. I don't need to do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I've taken this one endeavor. I'm going to do this the rest of my life because it needs to be done. It's like,
shining that light in the darkness.
Yeah.
My wife is doing some, as an actress and also working on some of her producer stuff. She's doing some things called hidden heroes that people who were just kids who horrible things happened in their childhood that could very easily go into a life of crime, but chose a different path, chose to do something good, or people that did end up in a life of crime, that end up transforming their life, etc. So, and everybody has a story. Everybody has, all of us have got some things in our past that we're not proud of, or things that were difficult, things that were painful, etc. And if we allow that to dictate our future, then we're never going to have humanity heal from the toxicity that we're in right now. And so I honor people who are shining that light in the darkness. That's what we did with Sound of Freedom. Is people didn't want to talk about it. 5 years ago, the average person couldn't listen to something like this, couldn't have a conversation around the dinner table. It's even hard right now. It's somewhat palatable by saying, okay, let's as adults talk about this. Where is it coming from? And what do we need to do to fix it? I can tell stories all day long of, these dangerous situations that people get excited about, whatever. But the truth is, we've got to identify how to eradicate child trafficking. And that's not going to happen by just doing undercover work. I realized after 10 years of undercover missions, I looked at the numbers and I realized that there were more children being sold today than there was 10 years ago. And I thought, how is this possible?
Right.
We're putting all this money, all of this stuff into it, and nothing is making a significant difference. And I realized that every single time that we pulled them out of this horrific position, it left a vacuum. And if not enough was being done to fix the demand, then 20 more children were being sucked back into the deepest recesses of hell to fill that demand. And I looked at myself in the mirror. I said, okay, Paul, 10 years ago, sitting on that chair, looking eye level with that child, making that commitment that you would dedicate your life to eradicating that evil. Guess what, Paul? You're not doing a very good job, because there's more now than there were then. And so I had to take a step back and ask myself, where is this coming from? And I realized that just that hurt people hurt other people, that almost every one of the traffickers had been trafficked themselves.
Yeah.
Almost every one of the perpetrators had been a victim of something. In fact, 70% of incarcerated victims report that they had some sort of childhood trauma. And that's just the ones that report it. The average age of somebody talking about or even remembering that serious trauma, that sexual trauma, the average age of somebody remembering something like that as a child is 52 years old. That's my age. I've raised my kids. I've built my career. And if you're holding on to that pain, it comes out in anger issues and addictions, and it comes out in anxiety and depression and all of these different things that control our life because of unresolved childhood trauma.
Yeah, low security prisons are in federal system are flooded with the nickname is chomos. I don't know if you ever heard the nickname. And it's funny because it's like 80 some odd over in the 80s, like 80 some odd percent of them will report that they were abused as a child.
Yeah.
And that's the ones that are saying it.
Yeah.
Who knows the ones that just don't recall or simply are saying or don't want to even acknowledge it, because I'm sure it's high. And most of the time it's also tends to be a correlation where it's like, oh, the guy was 9. Guess what he's interested in?
9-year-olds.
9-year-olds. You know what I'm saying? Like he was it's and so you think I always, you would hear this and I would always say that's horrible that, these guys were created and it's a horrible situation, but now you're a monster.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And you can't let monsters roam.
You can't.
It's unfair. I get it. I'm sorry. And I feel bad for you. And I know that you're a victim. But now
but it was a choice.
Yeah, but you're
almost every
victimizing
one of
people.
my undercover operators were abused as children themselves, right? And they instead of allowing that pain to push that pain on, or even in any way justify passing that pain on to another, they chose to be protectors.
Yeah.
Right?
These guys are clearly going the wrong way.
Exactly.
I mean, there's something else you can do than for you to give into this.
But, and I tell people this, don't get me wrong when I say this. I am not a sympathizer of anyone who hurts a child. I've literally put my life in danger hundreds of times to ensure that they never hurt innocents again. However, if we're going to fix this problem, we need to understand where it's coming from. And we need, I found myself wishing that I had a time machine. I could go back in time before they ever crossed that line. If I just went back in time and pulled the kids out earlier, more kids would be sucked back in. I have to fix the demand. I have to fix the perpetrator. So if I had a time machine, I'd go back and I would sit down with him and say, okay, what is going on in your life that makes you think that in any way it's okay to walk down that road, to hurt a child? What is going on in your life? And what do we need to do to give you the help, the love, the healing that you need? Now, I'm going to go down a road and tell you what I believe the solution is. And a lot of people aren't going to believe this because we've been lied to for the last 50 years on this. But I think it is incredibly important for us to understand how there are some very powerful tools to help people break free of childhood trauma, addictions, depression, PTSD, and all of this toxicity that we're holding on to. We can break free of those. My company my first successful company in my early 20s, I touched on earlier, was a cognitive restructuring program. It was a workbook, audio program, videos that help people change the negative habit patterns of thought. Created a lot of it in our youth. 95% of our day is controlled by our subconscious mind. And so and between the time of 0 to 8, 9 years old, our brain is in a state of what we call neuroplasticity. We're very, very impressionable. And so, which means good things. We can learn 3 languages at the same time. We can, at 3 years old, you can learn all this stuff, all of this information coming in that you can just absorb. Also, though, if something traumatic happens, an uncle does something horrific to this 7-year-old, 6-year-old, whatever else, a lot of times those things get embedded in that subconscious mind, some of them so deep that you don't even remember them at all, where they came from. But they're coming out in addictive behaviors. They're coming out in low self-esteem and anxiety and depression and PTSD. They're coming out in anger issues. All of these things are being controlled subconsciously many times, these behaviors. Even later in life, if you want to create a new habit, meaning put something into your subconscious mind, it's going to take about 21 days of being very consistent at doing the right thing long enough in order for that to stick. So if you're driving your car, most of that, you're hitting your brake, hitting your gas, that's coming from your subconscious mind. Your conscious mind is able to make the phone calls, have a conversation, et cetera. Your subconscious is driving, your life at this point. Well, moving forward, traditional therapy, even the things like what we did with my company, we had 12 weeks with a personal coach, 1 to 2 hours a day to be able to create real lasting change in something that was so deeply ingrained. And there was thousands of dollars and a lot of work. Fast forward, about 8 years ago, I was blowing through undercover operators. We had Green Berets with 300 missions in Afghanistan and in Iraq, et cetera. They already had PTSD. One undercover mission with me, seeing a menu with children.
Yeah. They're done.
They're done. They're like, what? My PTSD, they couldn't go on another mission. And so I'm like, okay, do I bring back in this company I built in my 20s, and we had 50,000 people a month calling in off this infomercial? Do I bring this company back to life? I had sold it, but do I recreate something that cognitive restructuring, helping people deal with their PTSD before they go out? Because some of these guys with that kind of PTSD already, they're ready to just unholster their weapon and end it right there. Being able to deal with that kind of darkness was super difficult. And so at this point, I I got a phone call from two of my operators who had done a lot of missions, Jimmy and Andy. Jimmy had done 13 undercover missions with me, and Andy had done 22. They called me up on a joint call together, and they said, Paul, do you trust us? I said, yeah, I literally trust you with my life. You know, we're out undercover. I'm in charge of talking. They're in charge of making sure I don't die. They said, you need to come to this transformational retreat. It'll be the most transformational retreat thing you've ever done in your life. And I said, that's saying something. You know, I know Tony Robbins personally. I've literally walked across coals with him right by my side. I've done transformational stuff. You can't tell me this is the most transformational thing in my life. They said, this doctor has identified ways to help people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma, in a matter of days, make real permanent change. I said, well, that's impossible. You know, that was what my company did in my early 20s. We were some of the best at that. You can't tell me it can happen in days. They said, I said, tell me more about what this is. They says it's a healing retreat. I said, I don't need to heal it. You know, at the time, like I talked about earlier, 10 years ago, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson. I had these big parties. I had this energy. It worked well undercover. It really did. I was in there with big ego. They said, yeah, Paul, you do need to heal. He says, you're on your second marriage headed for a divorce. Your kids don't talk to you. You have these raging parties at your house every other weekend with half-dressed girls. Your energy is off. Yeah, you're doing great things helping these kids undercover, but the rest of your life is a disaster. I'm like, okay, I trust you guys. What is it? What are they doing? And then they told me what this doctor was using. Said she is one of the best at understanding the proper use of psychedelics when it comes to trauma therapy and breaking free of these things. And then I'm like, wait, you guys know that, you know, I grew up in a church that said no mind altering anything, no drugs and alcohol and even coffee and none of those things. And they said, well, look into it some more. And I had thought that things like psilocybin in mushrooms, I thought that they were as dangerous as powder because they were Schedule I drugs since the late 60s, right? Come to find out, it's safer than table sugar.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's no what is it? There's no way to overdose on them.
No way.
There's no way to.
No, there's never been a case of addiction.
All right.
There's never been a case of overdose, not one. And when
they're microdosing people with.
Yeah, they're a little microdosing, but what she did with me was a macro dose.
Okay.
It was a full send operation, right? And Matt, this was the most positively impactful, transformational experience of my life. It was horrific and beautiful at the same time. Now, I'm not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high with their friends, right? Mm-hmm. This is because here's what happens. Here's the science behind it in 20 seconds. That neuroplasticity that we talked about when you're a kid between 0 to 7 years old, where your brain is just soaking in stuff and whatnot, that kind of ends after 8, 9 years old. You have a little bit of neuroplasticity, but the psilocybin creates a temporary state of neuroplasticity. Very, very, very impressionable in being able to work on things in your subconscious mind. So if you're at a rave party and you've got, you know, an orgy going on over here and rap music going over here and some guy yelling at his girlfriend over here, that environment in that state of neuroplasticity is damaging to your subconscious and what you're trying to create. However, if you're there with a trained facilitator, somebody who knows how to take that experience and mold it in the right way, and knows that you're dealing with some heavy trauma from 7 years old, knows that you're dealing with heavy trauma from being in Afghanistan, whatever it is, knows what you're working with, can then reform those things in that state of neuroplasticity. And for me, that very first one, the reason I say it was beautiful and horrific, what the facilitator and the medicine helped me to create was the purest sense of empathy, right? It took my empathy meter from almost nothing to off the charts. I could feel in every cell of my body, as if I was them, I could feel the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom. I could feel it as if I was them. And it was so hard. It was so dark. And then I could feel on the opposite side, I could feel the joy as if I was them when the children that we rescued were reunited with their families. And then I could feel the pain of the family that broke up because some guy was at my party and slept with a cheerleader and now he broke up his wife. And the ripple effect of my words and my actions of everything in my life was so profound, so real, as if I was them, is what the medicine gave me in that first experience, that it changed everything. It changed everything about how I was showing up in my relationships and my marriage. And, it ended up being where I couldn't stay in that toxic relationship of that marriage. So I ended up getting divorced there, which opened things up to the most beautiful relationship of my wife that I met in Haiti. But after that, we decided, you know what, this stuff is so powerful, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to really research it, and became facilitators in it. And I went into the Attorney General in Utah. I said, listen, this is so powerful as helping people overcome addictions and PTSD and childhood trauma is so powerful. I want to bring it to Utah. You can either arrest me or tell me how to make it legal. And he said, maybe we should do the latter. And so we started working with some legislatures. Utah almost not only decriminalized, but almost became the first state to fully legalize the use of psychedelics when it came to trauma therapy and dealing with addictions and PTSD. But then our governor decided he was going to veto my bill. And so we decided, you know what, screw you, we're going to move out. So we moved everything to Latin America. But in the beginning, we worked only with vets who had PTSD, a lot of my operators. Then we moved to dealing with helping people who had had severe childhood trauma, women who had had 10, 20 years worth of therapy and nothing really worked. And then that now we work exclusively with influencers. We've had some royalty and some world leaders and some business leaders, et cetera, where if I can teach them how to release everything that doesn't serve them and learn how to lead from a place of the heart, that ripple effect of good can not only impact their countries and their companies, but hopefully can help change the laws where we can start using those to help people break free of things that may end up taking them down a darker road. So that's something that, some people are like, oh, that's new information. Do your research. It has to be done in the right environment. People can go to liberatinghumanity.com and get lots of information there on how, the proper use of these tools and how you can use them to break free of those things in a legal environment.
Yeah, we interviewed a guy who was he was in the Army. Remember, he was he worked on helicopters. He was in Afghanistan. He was talking about, and he came here. He was talking about he was microdosing. Yeah. And he said it was helping. It was the only thing that had helped with his PTSD.
I'm curious. Okay, so you do whatever, like you take it, and then what do you do? Do you get like a therapy session, or what's that 24, 48?
Yeah. I'll tell you exactly how the whole thing works. Here's the proper way to do it. The non-proper way, get a bunch of mushrooms, go to a party. Yeah, what's up? That's the non-proper. Yeah. No. But even there are even facilitators in the U.S. that just have people come and, okay, here you go, here's your dose, have fun, work on your shit, look in the mirror and say good things about yourself, right? That works to a degree. But how ours works is this. Number one, once somebody signs up, now we're 6-day fully immersive, six night, usually 7 days, fully immersive transformational experiences, right? And so what happens is 2 weeks before they come, I spend about 15 to 30 minutes on the phone on a Zoom call, getting clear on their intention. Because if you just come and you have this window of opportunity of neuroplasticity, that if you're not really doing anything with it, you're not going to have the results, positively or negative. And you just go, oh, wow, everything looked really cool, right? But and we're talking about a macro dose. We're talking about 3+ grams, sometimes upwards of 7-8 grams, depending on the person and what they're trying to create, et cetera. Now, a micro dose, you take those 3 grams over a period of 30 days, right? So this is all in one experience. This is a full deep dive. This is why you need a facilitator there with you. And then so 2 weeks before, I get super clear on their intentions. Everything in your life that you want to release, everything, and you don't have to tell me everything. I tell all the guys when I'm on the phone with them, I say, listen, 90% of the guys who come either currently have or recently have had a problem with addiction, either to alcohol or pictures. You don't have to tell me about it, but you need to admit to yourself if there are things that are controlling you in a way where you want to release it. Whatever addictive behaviors, this is a powerful opportunity for you to break free of them. So get clear. People spend more time planning their next vacation than they do planning their life. I say over the next 2 weeks between now and the time that you come down, you need to spend more time planning your life, meaning your intentions for this event, than you would planning a vacation. So everything that you want to release, boom, 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 write all those things down. I'm too quick to anger with my kids, or I get triggered when my wife says this, or I get uncomfortable in this group of situation, or sometimes that thing that happened to me when I was 7 years old that comes up and it makes me feel uncomfortable. Whatever it is, right? Our visions of ourselves that we want to release, and then everything that we want to embrace. What's that 4.0? What's that 6.0 version of you look like? Because when we're down there, and those things are important for me to understand, because when you're in that state of neuroplasticity, I can put you in front of a mirror and have you go through your personal affirmations, and boom, they will stick. Instead of 21 days of, I'm a good person, I love myself, I'm wealthy, whatever it is, you can rewire some of those things in a very short period of time with the proper use of these tools and a facilitator. Then when people come down, we like to break them away from their city, from their people and everything. And ironically, remember how we talked about how dangerous Colombia was way back when I was first there? Colombia, especially in the Medellin, Colombia area, was the most dangerous place on the planet in the 80s when Pablo Escobar was there. He was taken out mid-90s. Most of the cartel went up to Mexico. Some went further south. Now that region is just coffee farms, chocolate farms, and rose farms. Most of the roses in the U.S. come from that region. So we ended up buying one of the chocolate farms, 200 cacao trees. We've got cabins all over. It's a river coming through the middle. It is springtime every single day of the year. Perfect, beautiful weather. And 200 chocolate trees, 40 avocado trees. It's beautiful. So we have people come down, connecting with nature. Now we're going to work on your shit.
But when they come back to the United States, their head's right, but they've gained 5 pounds. Is that?
No, they actually are super healthy. Everything
right. It's a chocolate factory.
Exactly.
The chocolate
factory, but it's pure cacao, so there's not all of the extra stuff in there.
I need the extra stuff.
Yeah.
I need the
but
almonds.
Yeah, you do have an almond tree.
Almonds, and that's my favorite Hershey's bar.
I've got a coconut tree, an almond tree, and chocolate trees. We could literally make an almond joy right there. Boom. And we've got sugar cane growing right behind.
And you can handle you can fix my emotional issues.
Exactly.
There's no reason to come back to the United States.
You just come down there. So the first day we do like a cacao ceremony, literally hot chocolate, but it's like 4 hours and working through with the hot chocolate and the roses and stuff.
Better, bro.
Working through it. I'd fallen in love with yourself, and then the next day we have a curated playlist put together by scientists at Johns Hopkins University that we say, okay, now, and we actually put the psilocybin in chocolate bars. You're going to say, okay, the psilocybin might not be addictive, but these chocolate bars are.
Right.
Right? And so we give you a couple of the chocolate bars, boom, you've got 2.5 grams in each one. So 1 or 2 of those, you got 4.5 grams. It's a full send. About 15 minutes later, you're laying there on your cot. We've got headphones on and an eye mask on. And, for the next 6 hours, you're going to need help walking to the bathroom if you need to go. But it's a deep transformational experience on the medicine with the music. And the first 2 hours is you and yourself and your intentions and this rewiring your subconscious mind and working with some stuff. And then about 2 hours into it, we pull that mask off and say, okay, now let's talk about what's going on. You're in this beautiful state of neuroplasticity. You remember everything. You're not going to, pull off your shorts and yell stupid shit, whatever. You remember everything, but you're in this very impressionable state. And now we can have a beautiful conversation about anything that we talked about that you want to release and rewire those and reframe that and see that thing that happened from your uncle at 7 years, see that from a different perspective, whatever it is that we need to rewire, put you in front of the mirror, have you say your positive affirmations, what it is that we need to implant those new neural pathways, that new stuff in your subconscious mind so that you come back a completely transformed person. In fact, we have 100% of the people over the last 4 months since we've finished our sanctuary have said that was the most transformational experience of my entire life. So, but it's something sadly we can't do in the US right now. I've been friends with RFK for about 10 years. We've been texting back and forth. He's committed to not only do some stuff with big pharma and the food companies, but to help decriminalize the proper use of psychedelics when it comes to helping people through some of these challenges. Here's the sad thing. When people ask all the time, well, why did it take you so long to get your movie out? What was the deal with that? Well, if you think that Epstein really hung himself, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, right? No, if a lot of this stuff on a high level is used as blackmail and manipulation. So yes, we were taking down rings throughout Latin America and whatnot, but the high level stuff, Epstein did not run everything on his own. If you were an agency, I won't say which, but let's say that you were an agency and you wanted full control of the votes of a senator, of a congressman, of a federal judge, you want to control their votes forever. Mm-hmm. You get them on film at an Epstein Island with a 12-year-old. You get them on film with any of those things, you control them forever, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, most other things, like let's say a honeypot, most other things are forgivable. Like people will, like your wife may or may not forgive you for having an affair if there are photos out there or a video. There are some things that are just, you making a racist comment. There's tons of things that people will be like, you could apologize and people will get over. They ain't getting over that.
No, not at all.
Never.
And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're white, you're black, you're rich, you're poor. Nobody's okay with somebody abusing children like that, right? But sadly, some of these elitist groups, there's initiations that are part of that involve that level of control. You want this kind of help to get to where you need to be. We need control over you to make sure that you will never go outside of us. So this is what we need. And so some of them willingly go into it, knowing that it's initiation, knowing that they're going to be able to get in these doors, get these roles, get all of that stuff. It's all over the place. This is the years ago, there was a book I read years and years ago called The CIA's Book of Dirty Tricks. And in there had these very things. You get them on film with stuff like this. You make this kind of a thing happen, and then you control them with the unforgivable. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I believe that it's not just in politics. I believe that in Hollywood, it's pervasive. The P. Diddy thing is just the tip of the iceberg. And guys, we need to be very aware of who we're supporting. I used to be a huge Will Smith fan. I loved all of his movies until I realized what his wife saw when he walked in on him in the bedroom and what parties he was at with P. Diddy and who else was at those parties and what was going on. And I thought, you know what? I sadly can't watch some of my favorite movies now because that actor's in it and I know what's going on there, and that actor's in it and I know what's going on there. And so my wife does more than this than me. I'm like, can we watch anything anymore? She goes, yeah, we can watch this movie and this movie. That's all. Because there's a lot of people, sadly, that are involved with what you and I would say is the unforgivable. But it's this secret Luciferian pact that they make that is part of how they get the infinite amount of popularity and wealth, et cetera, or power when it comes to politics. And it happens all the time. And it's planned very specifically. Our monetary system, our media, all of it is controlled. And even when our movie came out and everybody wanted to see it because we took it to the people by the people, right? We have my money and other high wealth investors that put it together. And then even when it came out, we had a grassroots movement with good people that were all part of social media that were pushing it out. It was, if you weren't on a somewhat conservative social media platform, you didn't even hear of Sound of Freedom. It was the #1 independent film on the planet, and you didn't even hear it because it wasn't mentioned at the Oscars. It wasn't mentioned on any of the big media channels. Nothing. I mean, we beat out Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible. We beat those out of the gate, and crickets. Nobody even talked about it. The only way you heard it was by good people saying you need to go see this movie.
I don't I just don't understand how the media can ignore things like that and craft the news in such a way and still sleep at night and not think that you're a scumbag. If you sleep hot at night, you know how disruptive that can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above, that's where Ghost Bed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, Ghost Bed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts to your body's temperature, every Ghost Bed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firm option with exceptional support, your Ghost Bed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a Ghost Bed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for 101 nights, risk-free, to make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping, and most items are shipped within 24 hours. If you're not sure which Ghost Bed is right for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get a personalized recommendation. Even better, our listeners can get 50% off site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/Cox and use the code COX at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/Cox with the code COX at the checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Dude, does it make sense? If you're working, if you're Don Lemon, and regardless of what your political views are, if you can't not know certain things are right, and even if you're neutral and you're being told from the top down, here's what we're focusing. Yeah, but what about this? And they go, no, ignore that. Why? Yeah. Instead, it's just they're blindly following whatever path they're being led along. And at some point, you would think, I don't know, there's just no journalists anymore. I was going to say your journalistic integrity, but the truth is if you have journalistic integrity, you don't end up on CNN.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You don't get to that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because you've asked too many questions that they thought, yeah, that dude's, he's asking too many. He's asking the right questions.
He wants the truth.
Get rid of him. We need someone that will blindly do what we're telling him to do.
Exactly. And sadly, we kind of got pigeonholed in the beginning because some of the actors were, speaking at super conservative rallies and everything else. And so people like, oh, this is a right-wing film. It's not. I mean, literally, only the religious part of the entire film was when Jim Caviezel says God's children are not for sale. Right? That's not religious, right? And so getting pigeonholed there was simply because some of them were trying to hide stuff. But I will say this, there are some people that really, even some people involved with the movie, who genuinely thought that if you voted Democrat, you're probably a sicko. I said, guys, just so you know, we've arrested just as many people on the right as the left. Yeah. It has nothing whatsoever. This is one thing we can all come together on. Everybody. This shouldn't be a right or left issue. Never should have been from the beginning. Not the border wall shouldn't have been right or left. The movie shouldn't have been right or nothing should have been right or left regarding the kids. This is all something that we can come together on and do it for our own kids. There's a book written almost 100 years ago that it kind of goes down. It's called Pawns in the Game by William Carr. Okay. Every chapter he says, okay, I'm going to drop a bomb. And then I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove it to you, right? He was in high-level military intelligence and some stuff, and he talks about what he calls the Luciferian order, which was been all the way back to the time, I mean, it's been forever, but how the Bilderberg group and the Rothschilds and the Baron Rothschild making these promises for infinite amounts of wealth if we put this kind of control upon humanity and their monetary system, in their media system, everything all the way across. And it lays out everything from World War I, World War II, what's going to happen with World War III, why it was all fought, all of this division between all of us, the breakdown of the nuclear family, the control of the media, all of this stuff by design in taking us to a level of control. This is why, I've got the Child Liberation Foundation, which helps to eradicate child trafficking. It's doing a fantastic job. But I also have Liberating Humanity. This is humanity as a whole is closer to a place of slavery than you can imagine. We sit here and think, oh yeah, slavery disappeared at the time of Abraham Lincoln. No, you've got human slaves more today than all 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade put together, which is what we were talking about with child trafficking. But beyond that, we've got all of us who our minds are being controlled with this manipulation, our finances are being controlled, our media is controlled. We need to wake up and liberate ourselves from all of this crap. This is one of the reasons I believe they demonized the proper use of psychedelics back in the late 60s, is because they knew that if people used them properly, they wouldn't be controllable. They would break free of all of this control factors in the media and the politics and everything else, so that they could truly awaken and think clearly.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like the public school. You're being, it's a minimal education to create workers. Like that's what public school is. Like they don't.
Absolutely.
Like, first of all, it would require one extra class of finance for you to understand that, hey kids, if you just put a couple $100 away in a savings account every month, you'd be a multimillionaire in 30 years. Like compound interest, like this isn't rocket science. You know, like there are little tiny changes you have to make that would guarantee that you would live a much, much better life. We don't teach them that.
We don't.
Teach them how to read, teach them how to write, teach them the history that we want them to know, teach them how to follow directions, how to work in a factory, how to be a low-level manager. And if they're super smart, they can become a manager.
Yeah.
But that's public school. If your family is wealthy, well, now we send you to the schools that teach you those extra couple of classes, and you have a much better chance of becoming wealthy, an entrepreneur, owning your own business. And it's subtle. It's not even huge. It's not even a massive amount of money or extra education. It's a couple of classes. It's a few more classes that you have to take. You don't have to take it for 5 years. The last year of high school, you could teach a couple extra classes, or over the course of 3 years, and it would fundamentally change everybody's thinking. But they don't do that. What you're doing is, how do we get rid of slavery? And instead of having to buy these slaves, house them, educate them, feed them, give them, keep them healthy. How do we do that? How do we get these guys to work for slave labor and give them just enough money so that they can house themselves, feed themselves, get their own, keep themselves healthy, get to work and get back? And if they can't even do that, we'll give them buses to get back and forth. We'll give them just enough.
Exactly.
So I mean, I've always, looked at that and thought, listen, they just changed it subtly, and they don't now everybody's free to work at Walmart and stock shelves and not be able to pay for your health care and struggle your whole life and take the bus back and forth to work and live in an expensive 1-bedroom apartment and just be in a shitty situation and basically be a slave the rest of your life. But free, YouTube's free. So,
and see, here's the thing: we live in a world of infinite abundance, yet we're literally in slavery, working 40 hours a week just to be able to survive. I have a book that'll be coming out next year. I've got one this year called The Sound of Freedom that'll be coming out in July, and it's got lots of details of keeping your kids safe and transforming the world, as well as some of the rescue missions, et cetera. But the one I'm working on for later this year is called Conscious Capitalism, about how literally there is infinite abundance for all of us, but we have to break free from these chains, this education system that's teaching us how to work in factories, understand the power of the creative mind and how we can pull together and create literal infinite abundance for everybody on earth. So super excited for that as well when it comes out.
Yeah, I was going to, the other thing I was going to say is that it's funny that all the things that can control your mind and the way you're thinking, all of that's free. Instagram, YouTube, like all of these are free things. You know what I'm saying? And how easily they can sway perception.
I have seen it firsthand. And people will watch Sound of Freedom and say, "Oh, that stuff doesn't happen." No, I know it's hard to swallow. It's hard to think that there are people out there with these intentions. I promise you there are.
Oh, listen, I can tell you right now, we can take an hour trip and drive down to the low security prison in Coleman, Florida, the federal prison. And I can tell you right now, 50% of the 2,000 inmates in the low
That's where they
are all sickos.
Yeah.
They're all weirdos.
Yeah,
you know?
They are. And
And they're just like normal people. That, you know what I'm saying? You would never have a clue.
guess.
Listen, we had 3 guys there that worked for NASA, and they were all locked up for. There was a military wing that, out of 150 guys in the military wing, like 130 of them had those crimes.
Wow.
And I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
And these are guys that they're looking at photographs. Because if they're hands-on, and there's a few that are hands-on, but if they're really hands-on, they end up in the state and they get less time in the state for being hands-on than they do in the feds for looking at photographs. So, I mean, the disparity is insane. Like, these are guys that actually made that step, took that step and did something, and they get less time.
Wow.
It's
broken system.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I believe we can fix it. I really do. It's not going to be shooting more guys. It's not going to be arresting more guys. It's not going to be rescuing more kids. Yes, those things need to happen. Yes, we need to make sure that, once they've crossed that line, they're wasting my oxygen. We need to make sure that they're not in a place where they can harm a child. However, if we're going to really fix this, we've got to back up a little bit. We've got to take our adolescents and our young men and help them find the healing that they need before they ever pass that trauma on.
Get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what needs to happen. The Sound of Freedom book, they can pre-order it on Liberating Humanity. They can even go to sofbook.com, soundoffreedombook.com or sofbook. It just made it easy if somebody's driving in their car or whatever else. So you can go to soundoffreedombook.com or sofbook.com, or you can go right into, and those will just link you into liberatinghumanity.com. And Liberating Humanity not only has a pre-order for the Sound of Freedom book, but it also has things to keep your kids safe. It also has some different programs by some of my trainers. And it also has, under the retreats, a whole bunch of information on the healing retreats and the proper use of some of these plant medicines to help people get through the things that they need to get through, et cetera. So all of those links are on there as well. And you can go from there, get linked into the Child Liberation Foundation if you want to donate and help, or you can just go to childliberation.org.
Hey, you guys, I appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button to get notified of videos just like this. Please share the video. Also, we're going to leave all of Paul's links that he just went over. We're going to leave all of those links in the description box. So you just click on the description box, go in there, hit the links. It'll bring you right there. Really appreciate you guys watching. Please consider joining our Patreon. Also, we have a clips channel and a shorts channel, and the links are also in the description. And also, those links are on the website. You can click there and go there and subscribe. Thank you very much, you guys. I really appreciate it. See you.